Chapter 1650. Bai Xiaowen thought to himself, Chenrong, you are worrying too much. Would interfering in mortal affairs cause one's Tao heart to be covered in dust, making it difficult for one's cultivation to improve? This was indeed the case for native cultivators, but it was not the case for evolvers like Bai Xiaowen. The Song and Mongol Wars should be the main storyline of the dynasty struggle. If one joined in, they would have a chance to trigger a large number of missions, which meant comprehending light balls. With comprehending light balls, would one need to worry about their cultivation not improving? Not mentioning the benefits in terms of cultivation, if Bai Xiaowen could control an empire, he would be able to obtain an endless amount of resources. He would be able to use the power of the entire plain to help the White Phoenix territory develop. The benefits from the above two aspects were enough for Bai Xiaowen to bring the 4 kings under him to join the dynasty struggle. Of course, as a righteous youth with ideals and ambitions, Bai Xiaowen could not answer Chenrong like that. Luckily, without the benefits, his reasons were still sufficient. Bai Xiaowen changed the topic and said, I am not worried about the Song dynasty collapsing. I don't have any good feelings toward the Zhao family. It makes no difference to me whether the world is surnamed Zhao, Li, or Wang. Chenrong frowned. Then why are you? Bai Xiaowen continued, I am not worried about the Song dynasty collapsing. I am worried about the Han dynasty collapsing. Looking at Chenrong's confused gaze, Bai Xiaowen slowly said, the Han dynasty, Sui dynasty, and Tang dynasty collapsing was just the imperial court changing names. Politics, law, research, and other aspects are all the same. It can be said that they are the continuation of the Han dynasty. However, the Mongols destroying the Song dynasty is different. The Mongols are a race on horseback. After they enter the central plains, they will spread the backward grassland system to the world, causing a destructive blow to the Han dynasty's culture. This will cause a gap in Chinese civilization. This is the collapsing of the world. What Bai Xiaowen said was not nonsense. Instead, it was reasonable and well-founded. In Earth's history, the Chinese civilization had always been ahead of the West. Why was it overtaken and had a history of humiliation? This was because since the Mongols, Yuan dynasty, the Chinese civilization had started to reverse. First of all, the ruler's thinking had greatly declined. The imperial censor of the southern Song dynasty, Fang Ting, had warned Song Gaozong, the world belongs to China, to the ancestors, to the officials, to the people, and to the 3 armies. It does not belong to His Majesty. In other words, the officials of the Song dynasty believed that the emperor was only managing the world on behalf of the people and had to constantly reflect on himself to be a good emperor. However, the rulers of the Mongolian grasslands brought the concept of the grasslands to the central plains. They treated the population, land, and other wealth as their private property. They even started to implement the backward feudal system. This point was reflected even in the Ming dynasty. Secondly, there was the strict, rigid, and insurmountable division of social classes. The Yuan dynasty abolished the Song dynasty's military recruitment system and divided the people into military households, craftsman households, salt farmers, Confucians, and so on. Their identities were passed down from generation to generation and could not be changed. This reversal of history also affected the Ming dynasty. There was also the degeneration of property rights. In the Yuan dynasty, officials could confiscate people's property, including family members, at will, but the confiscation system was strictly limited and rarely used in the Song dynasty. There was also the harshness of punishment. Physical punishment, which was abolished during the Han Emperor era, was revived. The judicial system was wantonly destroyed. The Dali Temple was abolished, the law school was abolished, and the criminal law examination was cancelled. Even good systems such as Juyusi, separation of trial and punishment, and Yanyusi, when a criminal overturned his testimony, he had to be retried, were all abandoned. What did this series of reversals lead to? In terms of economy, there were already signs of capitalism. In terms of culture, there were signs of a renaissance in Huaxia Empire, which fell into a deep sleep. 100 years later, the West started a renaissance. As for Chinese civilization, due to the arrival of barbaric rulers, it fell into a dark regression that lasted hundreds of years. The scholars of the Ming and Qing dynasties could only imagine the noble character of the previous generation from the poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. When the Mongols took over Changsha, hundreds of scholars from the Yuelu Academy all died in battle. When the southern Song dynasty was destroyed, the officials first used their swords to drive their wives into the sea. Then, they carried the little emperor and jumped into the sea to commit suicide. The Song dynasty's court and officials all jumped into the sea to die for their country. As for the Ming dynasty, when Chongzhen hanged himself, there was only a eunuch by his side. The reason for this was due to the cruelty of the ruling class after the Yuan dynasty. The Ming dynasty was also cruel due to the influence of the barbarians. They ignored the value of life and suppressed the thoughts of others. As a result, in the face of foreign aggression, most of the Han people were numb and lost their spiritual backbone. Bai Xiaowen couldn't say too much to Qinrong. After all, there was no way he could talk about the historical development process after the Yuan dynasty. Qinrong also found it difficult to understand. She didn't have Bai Xiaowen's broad vision. Bai Xiaowen said, "Master Chen, you were born in a family of weavers in Jiangnan, and your cloth was sold all over the world, right?" Qinrong nodded. "It's all thanks to the development of the 4 generations of the Qin family that we can have this family business." Bai Xiaowen said, "If one day, the governor takes a fancy to the Qin family's property and casually arranges a crime, he can sentence all of the Qin family's wealth to be lost to the government, the men to be slaves, and the women to the musical house. Will the Qin family still have the motivation to actively develop and expand the family business?" Qinrong said in a daze, That's impossible, right? For such a big matter, the governor can't hide the truth from the public. Even if he finds out the crime, it's not up to him to decide. If the Qin family wants to overturn the case, there's still the Supreme Court. Unless the governor and the Supreme Court are in cahoots, but will the local officials and the officials in the capital collude like this? Bai Xiaowen said, "You're thinking too much. If the Mongols destroy the Song dynasty, those barbarians from the grassland will rule the central plains. Not to mention a governor, even a county magistrate can destroy the family. Taking a step back, the Mongols are cruel and bloodthirsty, and they love to massacre cities. It's hard to say whether the Qin family can survive until the end of the war. Maybe the Mongols won't allow the Han people to continue farming and weaving, and they want to turn all the farmland in the central plains into pastures." After a pause, Bai Xiaowen concluded, "Changing the surname of the surname is called the subjugation of the country. It's full of benevolence and righteousness, and as for leading beasts to eat humans, people will eat each other, and it's called the subjugation of the world." Gu Yanwu's Chronicles of the Sun, Bai Xiaowen started with Qinrong's family, and finally made Qinrong realize the difference between the so-called subjugation of the country and the subjugation of the world. She also seemed to understand why Bai Xiaowen wanted to throw himself into the world of mortals and reverse the trend of the world. For Bai Xiaowen, even if the Shaowei dimension was not the orthodox history, it was not the same as the earth. Changing the historical process of the Mongols destroying the Song dynasty here was meaningless to the history of the Huaxia on the earth that had already happened. But for the Shaowei dimension, and for Bai Xiaowen, it was meaningful. Chapter 1651. Bai Xiaowen didn't mention the benefits he gained from participating in the war between the Song and the Mongols. He only talked about the destruction of the country. Of course, he wasn't lying to Qinrong. This was because Bai Xiaowen had also lamented the fall of the Song dynasty in history. Bai Xiaowen wasn't a nationalist, and he didn't have strong national sentiments. He had enmity towards the Mongol Empire and the Qing dynasty. Apart from the foreign races entering the Central Plains, he also could not tolerate the massacres of the Han people by them. In 1207, the population of the Jin Kingdom was 81 million. 27 years later, the Mongols destroyed the Jin Kingdom. The population was reduced to 75 million, and the mortality rate was 90%, Shang Cheng's Historical Essentials of China. The Jin Kingdom occupied the land of the northern Song dynasty. Most of the people living in the Jin Kingdom were Han people. When the Mongols destroyed the southern Song dynasty, 200 cities were massacred. The war in Sichuan was the worst. The population was reduced to 4%. This figure was calculated by combining the records of the Yuan dynasty's founding ancestor and Li Xinchuan's miscellaneous records of the court. I won't go into the details. It was recorded that the Mongols massacred 200 million people in the world. 60 million of them were killed in the Song and Jin kingdoms. This was a conservative estimate. Therefore, fighting against the Mongols and continuing the unification of the Han kingdom was also Bai Xiaowen's wish. Therefore, he was more persuasive when he persuaded Qinrong. Qinrong thought for a long time and said, "Now I understand why you did this. LV Wang, I admire your sacrifice and I'm willing to support your dream." Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "Thank you." Qinrong then said, "However, I can't use the power of the entire Shangqing school to help you fight against the Mongols. The elders of Shangqing school won't agree. I can only provide you with my personal help and help you build a resonance transmission array." Bai Xiaowen nodded to show that he understood. The Mongols' massacre in the 13th century had just begun. Qinrong and the elders of Shangqing school couldn't see the future. In the eyes of these cultivators, self-cultivation, self-improvement, and seeking a higher realm was the ultimate goal. Everything in the mortal world was just a burden and an obstacle. Qinrong had made the decision to help Bai Xiaowen out of consideration for their friendship. 3 days later, Bai Xiaowen and Qinrong led several leader-level disciples of the Shangqing school to Black Sky Peak. They found the ruins of the resonance transmission formation built in the Tang territory. Bai Xiaowen used the source of spirit energy and cooperated with Qinrong and a few disciples to repair this array formation. He shifted the location of the resonance to the teleportation array of the White Phoenix territory. An azure door of light slowly opened. The resonating teleportation array was successfully constructed. At this moment, Bai Xiaowen also received a notification from the spiritual realm's laws. The spatial resonance teleportation array was activated. Bai Xiaowen followed the instructions and made some settings for the resonance teleportation array. For example, he could only use the teleportation array with the consent of the White Phoenix territory. "Is it done?" Qinrong asked. "Yes, it went very smoothly," Bai Xiaowen said. Back then, a group of martial artists from the Black Sky sect could assist the Tang territory in building the teleportation array. What about these professional cultivators from the Shangqing school? Of course, it was easy to repair a small array formation. That's good. What are you going to do next? Bai Xiaowen said, "I'm going to set up a secret organization to infiltrate the upper echelons of the Great Song government, gather intelligence, and seize power." Secret organization. What's the name of the organization? Can you tell me, so that when the disciples of the Shangqing school go out for training, unnecessary conflicts will arise because of misunderstandings? Qinrong asked. Name? Bai Xiaowen thought for a moment. Let's call it the Undying Group. Qinrong was silent for a moment. Why is it called Undying? Bai Xiaowen smiled and raised his hand to summon a ghoul archer. Because the members of this organization are all undying puppets that I control. Strictly speaking, the leaders of the 4 major clans could no longer be considered as marionettes. They had their own intelligence. But in Xiao Ding's world, it was more reasonable to call them puppet demon soldiers. Qinrong understood, but still couldn't help but say, this name is a bit too straightforward. How about we call it the Longevity Sect? Doesn't undying mean longevity? That's fine too. Bai Xiaowen, on the other hand, readily accepted. He felt that Qinrong's naming skills seemed to be a bit better than his. Longevity Sect sounded like a righteous sect full of immortal aura. Initial favorability +10. Qinrong saw that Bai Xiaowen had accepted her nomination and felt inexplicably happy. She said, "Is there anything else that you need my help with?" Bai Xiaowen pondered for a moment. The most important thing in an intelligence organization is to exchange information. Is there a communication talisman that can be used for longer distances? Bai Xiaowen found the best communication talisman in the Shangqing School's sect contribution exchange list. It could only transmit information within a few hundred miles. It was about the same as the pair of wooden carvings that Chenrong had given him. This was obviously not the best communication talisman because Chenrong, who had made this wooden carvings, was only a level 13 junior leader. Now that Chenrong had cultivated the Shangqing treasure, she was a level 15 rare overlord, half a step away from king level. Not to mention other things, her talisman-making skills must have greatly improved, right? Bai Xiaowen speculated very logically. Sure enough, Chenrong immediately took out a talisman and a jade scroll and handed them to Bai Xiaowen. This is a 1,000-mile voice transmission talisman. It can be used even from 1,000 miles away. Each talisman can be used 10 times. I made it with reference to the Shangqing treasure. In the Jade Scroll, the method to use the 1,000-mile voice transmission talisman is recorded. Without waiting for Bai Xiaowen to thank him, Chenrong took out a small and delicate paper crane. If the distance is more than 1,000 miles, you'll have to use the flying crane messenger. The advantage of the flying crane messenger is that it can be used for long-distance communication. It can be delivered even if the distance is thousands of miles. Its disadvantage is that its flying speed is average. It can only fly 1,500 miles a day. Each paper crane can only be used once. Chenrong also taught Bai Xiaowen how to use the paper crane. Thank you so much. You've helped me a lot. Bai Xiaowen hurriedly thanked him. The value of these communication methods was immeasurable. Don't be in a hurry to thank me. Chenrong suddenly revealed a sly smile. These are not free. Your sect contribution points will be deducted. So, Elder Lu, how many 1,000-mile voice transmission talismans and flying crane messenger do you want? Your sect contribution points don't seem to be enough. Bai Xiaowen, of course, he wanted as many of these convenient communication tools as he could get his hands on. If possible, Bai Xiaowen wanted to learn how to make them. Of course, he couldn't make these high-end talismans now. He didn't know the Shangqing treasure. Therefore, he could only obediently lower his head to Great Sect Master Chen. Chapter 1652. After the resonance teleportation array was completed, the Shangqing school disciples were sent away. However, Headmaster Chenrong stayed at Black Sky Peak for 5 days. During these 5 days, Bai Xiaowen used the newly built resonance array to summon 300 skeleton workers from the White Phoenix territory. Because of this, Bai Xiaowen spent nearly 1,000 spirit crystals. In the spiritual realm, even if the resonance array was built, the cost of summoning the territory army was still too high for the lords. These skeleton workers were very weak. They were only at level 3 or 4 of the awakened ones. Each of them cost more than 3 spirit crystals. If it was an army of the 5 elements flags, it would cost 100 to 200 spirit crystals to summon a level 10 warrior. It was almost the same as the cost of recruiting people. Summoning 105 elements flags warriors would easily cost 10,000 to 20,000 spirit crystals. It was really scary. Therefore, the real advantage of the lords was in the main material plane and the universe secret realm, which were outside the spiritual realm. In those places, the lords only needed a source of spirit power. They didn't need to spend additional spirit crystals to complete the summoning. The cost was greatly reduced. Bai Xiaowen summoned these skeleton workers mainly to clean up the ruins of Black Sky Peak, repair the Black Sky Palace, and make it the base of the Chansun sect. After accompanying Bai Xiaowen for 5 days, Chenrong also had to leave. She needed to take charge of the daily affairs of the Shangqing school. During these 5 days, Chenrong made a batch of 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talismans and talisman paper cranes. He gave them to Bai Xiaowen and said, "You don't have enough contribution points, so you can owe me. After I return to the Shangqing school, I will continue to make these 2 talismans in my free time. When this batch of talismans is used up, you have to come to the Shangqing school to get them. Your demon soldiers and ghost generals can't enter the Shangqing school. Remember this." Bai Xiaowen could only agree. Then he said, "Headmaster Chen, wait. I have another request." "Go ahead." Bai Xiaowen said, I want to add my spiritual power imprint into the rune circuits of the basic sword talisman. However, my attainments in the Tao of talismans are very shallow, so I really can't find any clues. Can you do it for me? Qinrong did not ask what it was used for. He nodded and said, combination sword talisman? It wasn't difficult. Do you have any additional requests? Bai Xiaowen thought to himself that Qinrong should be considered a top-notch expert in the art of talismans in Xiaodingji. This level of difficulty was indeed no challenge to her. Thus, he took a step forward and said, there is only one condition. Try to reduce the consumption of origin power. Understood. Qinrong also put away his relaxed expression. Reducing elemental energy consumption was not a high requirement, but it was definitely not low either. How much would it take to be considered perfect? There was no end to it. I'm leaving. Qinrong glanced at Bai Xiaowen but didn't say anything in the end. In Qinrong's mind, LV Wang was an ideal partner. Exceptional looks, extraordinary talent, powerful strength, great reputation, and he was also the owner of an uncivilized territory. Compared to LV Wang, the other disciples and young heroes of the pugilistic world all paled in comparison. They were like fireflies compared to the bright moon. However, if LV Wang didn't take the initiative to confess, how could a reserved girl like her speak first? What was more hateful was that LV Wang had other women accompanying him. Originally, Qinrong had some resentment towards him, but what about now? In Qinrong's mind, LV Wang had become a young hero with lofty ideals. Throwing a tantrum with LV Wang again? Qinrong knew that he couldn't do it. Wait for it, Wang. You'll be mine sooner or later. Qinrong stepped onto a giant red-crown crane made of paper and soared towards the south. Bai Xiaowen looked at Qinrong's back and sighed silently. He wasn't an idiot in love. How could he not understand Qinrong's thoughts? However, Bai Xiaowen could see clearly that Qinrong was an independent person. He was different from Jinmi, Li Shi, and Cecilia. Qinrong was very possessive. This was one of the reasons. Qinrong was more rational. He was a bit like Empress Wu Zetian. He wouldn't value Bai Xiaowen more than Changqing school. This was another reason. Therefore, it was better to play the role of partner. 2 days later. In the sky above Black Sky Palace, a frost dragon circled and descended. A 2-meter-tall knight clad in black armor walked down from the frost dragon. It was the Bone Clan's heavenly king, Abaddon. Abaddon was carrying a person in his hand. This person was wearing the Song Dynasty's official uniform, but he didn't wear a hat. His face was covered in dust and he looked a little disheveled. Abaddon, who did you bring with you? Great ruler. Abaddon dropped the person in his hand and bowed. This is an elite-level demon. His other identity is a spy of the Song Dynasty. A spy of the Song Dynasty? A demon? Bai Xiaowen's interest was piqued. He glanced at the trembling person and asked, how did you catch him? Abaddon said, we followed the ruler's orders and sneaked into Lenin City to gather information. However, after we left the city, the Sigdelifa discovered that someone was following us, so we beat them at their own game and caught him. After the Sigdelifa figured out the identity of this demon and the Song Dynasty's spy, he felt that he was very valuable alive, so he asked me to bring him to report to the ruler. After a pause, Abaddon presented another piece of paper. This is the information we gathered over the past few days. Please take a look, ruler. Bai Xiaowen nodded and smiled. The Sigdelifa is right. This person with 2 identities is definitely a key figure. Moreover, he came from the Song Dynasty's court. The information he knows is definitely more detailed than what you have gathered. Taking the page, Bai Xiaowen said to the trembling person, what's your name? What's your background? Tell me honestly. The person lowered his head and said, my name is Zhang Shi. I'm a rabbit demon. I'm not asking what kind of demon you are. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. I'm asking you, what's your identity in the Song Dynasty? The rabbit demon Zhang Shi hurriedly said, I work under Lordly of the Secrets Department. Because of my sharp ears and eyes, Lordly arranged for me to monitor Lenin and guard against foreign spies. What kind of department is the Secrets Department? Who is Lordly? The rabbit demon Jiangshi said, the Secrets Department is a spy department directly under the Privy Council. Lord Li's name is Li Zhixiao. His true form is a wolf demon, and his cultivation is 10 times higher than mine. Bai Xiaowen's gaze focused. He didn't expect another demon to jump out. It really lived up to the saying, demons run amok. Tell me everything you know. Bai Xiaowen gently shook the page full of information. My subordinates also found out a piece of information. If what you said is not true and contradicts this information, you'll have to explain the reason. The rabbit demon Jiangshi hurriedly said, I'll tell you everything I know. I'll tell you everything. Chapter 1653. Bai Xiaowen combined the information brought by Abaddon and observed the aura fluctuations of the rabbit demon Jiangshi. He could basically confirm that the rabbit demon was telling the truth and did not dare to lie. Of course, not lying did not mean that he was not hiding something. Jiangshi must have hidden something, and Bai Xiaowen could not find out everything. Actually, the information given by Jiangshi was enough. Combined with the information, Bai Xiaowen finally had a general understanding of the current situation. Mongolia had not changed its name to the Yuan dynasty, but was called the Great Mongolian Empire. The founding emperor, Genghis Khan, was still alive. In history, Genghis Khan had died of illness 5 years ago. In history, after Genghis Khan's death, his third son, Ajadai, assassinated his fourth son, Talyui, causing internal friction among the Mongolians. In this world, Genghis Khan was still alive. The Jin kingdom was in a worse state than in history. First, they gave up Hunan, Hebei, Shandong, and other places and moved their capital to the south. Then, their new capital was destroyed. The Jin kingdom's emperor, Wanyan Shoshu, fled to Kaizhou and was besieged for months. It was worth mentioning that other than the Mongolian army, the Song generals Meng Liang and Jiang Hai were also besieging Kaizhou. The Jin kingdom is finished. It was 2 years earlier than in history. Bai Xiaowen said, why did the Song dynasty ally with the Mongols to destroy the Jin kingdom? Don't they understand that if the lips die, the teeth will be cold? Once the Jin kingdom is destroyed, the Mongols' next target will be the Song dynasty. Bai Xiaowen's understanding of history could not be comprehensive. It was already good enough that he could remember the time of each regime's destruction and some basic information. As for the specific details of their destruction, he did not know. Especially for a regime like the Jin kingdom that only had average historical influence. Jiangshi said carefully, actually, there was a debate in the imperial court. The prime minister once suggested that we provide aid to the Jin kingdom to protect the Song dynasty from the Mongols. But, the Jin kingdom did not have the intention to fight against the Mongols. In recent years, they have repeatedly invaded Huainan. So, the prime minister could not go against the will of the people and could only ally with the Mongols to destroy the Jin kingdom. Bai Xiaowen was speechless. The Jin kingdom was probably used to bullying the southern Song dynasty. Even when their own backyard was on fire, they still had the mind to invade the southern Song dynasty. What Bai Xiaowen did not know was that the Jin kingdom in history was the same. Facing the strong enemy in the north, Mongolia, and the weak enemy in the south, Song, the Jin people's plan was to lose in the north and replenish in the south. After giving up the east of the two rivers, the Jin people were seriously short of money and food, so they wanted to occupy the rich and populous Huainan, which was greedy for the reserves of Huainan. However, even though Great Song was not aggressive enough, they were able to rely on their mountain passes, city walls, and geography to protect themselves. Not only did the Jin army not gain anything from their many attacks, they even suffered heavy losses. In Jin Xuanzong's southern expedition, 10 soldiers and horses were killed, and none of them survived. The country's elites were almost killed, and the Shu prefecture's cavalry was all in the south. Jin history. So that's how it is. The Jin kingdom is seeking its own destruction. No wonder the Song Ting is willing to ally with the Mongols, Bai Xiaowen said. The Prime Minister you mentioned seems to have some knowledge. If I recall correctly, the current Prime Minister should be Shi Miyuan, right? The rabbit demon Zhang Shi nodded. Yes, it is Shi Miyuan. Bai Xiaowen was secretly amazed. Shi Miyuan was a famous treacherous official in the southern Song dynasty. He was almost on par with Qin Hui. It was not a coincidence that both of them had the posthumous title of Zhongxian. However, Bai Xiaowen found a flaw in the rabbit demon's respectful title for Shi Miyuan. He snorted and said, Shi Miyuan is also a demon, right? Bai Xiaowen no longer restrained his spiritual energy waves and activated them. Immediately, the rabbit demon Zhang Shi felt the pressure increase. The rabbit demon Zhang Shi immediately became terrified and nodded. Yes, Shi Miyuan is a tree demon. The Song Ting Ting is really a demon. Why didn't you mention it in your narration just now? Bai Xiaowen said coldly. Abaddon took a step forward and revealed his 3-meter-tall true form. Black smoke billowed in his hand and a giant lance appeared in his palm. He pointed it at Zhang Shi's neck. You dare to hide things from the great ruler. You are guilty. Zhang Shi raised his hands in fear. Spare me. How many demons are there in Shi Miyuan's faction? Tell me the truth. Bai Xiaowen said. The rabbit demon Zhang Shi said, I don't know much. The important figures in Shi Miyuan's faction, such as Li Zhixiao, is a wolf demon. The assistant minister of justice, Liang Chengda, is a pig demon. There is also Commander Mo Zhe, who is a rat demon. These three are called the three evils by Shi Miyuan's political enemies. As for the others, there are some demons with low cultivation. Like me, they all receive a salary from the Department of Secrets and are under the jurisdiction of Li Zhixiao. Bai Xiaowen asked again, you said that the wolf demon's cultivation is 10 times higher than yours. What about the pig demon and rat demon? Zhang Shi said, they are similar to Surly. Bai Xiaowen said, then what about Shi Miyuan? He should be stronger than the three evils, right? Zhang Shi lowered his head and said, I don't know. As for the Secret Service, it was a spy department under the Privy Council. This was what Zhang Shi had described, and it was also within the scope of Bai Xiaowen's knowledge. He knew that there were 2 spy agencies in the Song dynasty, the Secret Service and the Imperial City Division. Among them, the Imperial City Division was the spy department under the jurisdiction of the Emperor. After asking for this information, Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. Abaddon asked in a deep voice, Master, how should we deal with this demon? The rabbit demon Zhang Shi hurriedly knelt and kowtowed. Sir, spare me, spare me. Seeing this rabbit demon who only knew how to beg for mercy, Bai Xiaowen shook his head speechlessly. Don't kill him for the time being. I want to see the demons lurking in the southern Song dynasty through him. Abaddon, send me to Linen. Yes. Abaddon withdrew his 3-meter-tall body and still transformed into a 2-meter-tall armored knight. He picked up the rabbit demon Zhang Shi. The frost dragon lowered its head. Bai Xiaowen climbed on the dragon's back first, and Abaddon followed. Then, the frost dragon's magic power vibrated, and it flapped its bone wings and flew into the sky. The capital of the southern Song dynasty, Linen Prefecture. In a mansion in the western suburbs, Bai Xiaowen met with the other 3 heavenly kings. After the 3 heavenly kings paid their respects, Delifa Sig came forward and reported, Master, you gave another order for us to test our clan leadership skills. We have finished the test. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. Speak. At present, it seems that Abaddon's death gangrene is the most effective. As long as the deceased were infected with death gangrene, Abaddon can resurrect them as bone race servants in batches, Delifa Sig said. There's no way to test the upper limit of this number for the time being because there are not enough samples. Bai Xiaowen's request was that the 4 heavenly kings could not test their skills on innocent humans. They could only choose criminals, bandits, or enemies. Therefore, there were not enough samples to test the upper limit of Abaddon's death gangrene. Chapter 1654. Bai Xiaowen praised, the bone race is strong to begin with, and Abaddon has such an efficient skill to create bone race slaves. Abaddon will be able to unleash his full potential on the battlefield, and the bone race's army will grow rapidly. It seems that the bone race may become our main force in this invasion. Delifa Sig hurriedly said, Master, although Abaddon's efficiency is high, the bone race slaves he creates are not as strong as we expected. Those who were elites when they were alive only have the strength of a normal template after becoming bone race slaves. Those who were normal when they were alive can only become the cheapest skeleton soldiers. They can't even reach a normal template. Lower by one template? That's normal. Bai Xiaowen did not think much of it. It would be too much of a bug to replicate a bone race slave's strength when they were alive. It was unrealistic. Also, Bai Xiaowen could use Death's appearance to consume soul essence to strengthen the slaves created by the 4 heavenly kings. It was just that the consumption of soul essence was higher. Delifa Sig said, compared to Abaddon's death gangrene, Butcher Paji's suture skill is the least efficient. He can only suture one corpse race slave at a time, and he needs several corpses to complete it. Paji needs a lot of fresh corpses. This is a contradiction to Abaddon's. Paji grumbled unhappily, Paji's underlings are very strong. Delifa Sig did not lie in his report and said honestly, yes, the suture monsters Paji creates are basically the same template as the deceased when they were alive. They are perfect meat shields, and their resistance and recovery are amazing. Bai Xiaowen asked, what if you use one elite and several normal corpses? Delifa Sig shook his head, sorry, I haven't tried it yet. Bai Xiaowen said, this is very important. You must try it. Understood. Delifa Sig nodded and then said, Master, darkness, I have the ability to absorb darkness. Master, my darkness absorption may be slow in creating soul race slaves, but I only need to absorb the resentment of the dead or the dark energy inside dark creatures to be used as raw materials. This doesn't conflict with Abaddon or Pudge. Also, the soul race warriors are the best in terms of mobility and resistance to physical damage due to their racial characteristics. Bai Xiaowen nodded and said, very good. The soul race can cooperate with the bone race or the corpse race. Vampire Lord, Vladimir, who had been silent all this time, suddenly bowed and said, please allow me to speak, great ruler. Soul race warriors, to resist physical damage to their enemies with soul race warriors, with the soul race warriors, with the soul race warriors with the race will suffer additional damage. Their mobility is to say, their soul is to Pajies with soul race. The blood race's cursed body was passive. Compared to the soul race's incorporeal body, they both had their advantages, to Paji. To Paji. To Pai. Was. Paweth. I'm the one reporting to the master. You don't have the right to speak, Sigurd said coldly. Vladimir smiled, bowed in apology, and took a step back. His etiquette was impeccable. As the heavenly king with the least qualifications and influence, it was only right for Vladimir to cower when facing the most senior and strongest individual, Sig Delifa. Bai Xiaowen did not stop this scene. He waved his hand and said, continue reporting. Yes, Master, Sig Delifa continued, Master, I've inspected the Imperial Army camp in the Shouting Plain. The bottom-level soldiers in this plain are very weak. They are not even at the normal template. They do not have any special energy such as aura shield or essence energy. Therefore, the advantage of the soul race warriors when facing these bottom-level soldiers is infinitely magnified. The bottom-level soldiers do not have spirit energy. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. It seemed that the bottom-level soldiers in the Shouting Plain only had the attributes of a normal template. How important was spirit energy to the living beings in the Evolver's world? The stronger the template, the higher the priority of spirit energy and the greater the effect. Take the king-level expert, Lord Black Sky, as an example. A Lord Black Sky with abundant spirit energy could fight dozens of Lord Black Sky without spirit energy. If it were a normal template soldier, the effect of spirit energy would not be so obvious. However, 1 against 3 would definitely not be a problem. He just did not know if the bottom-level soldiers of the Mongol army also did not have spirit energy. Bai Xiaowen did not think it was possible. The Mongols were able to dominate the 13th century and establish a great empire across Europe and Asia. The bottom-level Mongol soldiers were definitely strong. At the very least, they were normal templates. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen did not agree with Sid Delafa's statement that the advantage of the soul race warriors when facing the bottom-level soldiers is infinitely magnified. Of course, it did not mean that the soul race warriors were useless against enemies with spirit energy. Against physical attacks with spirit energy, the soul race warriors could also use spirit energy to protect their bodies and prevent themselves from additional damage. Continue. Bai Xiaowen did not have the intention to judge Sid Delafa. Sid Delafa glanced at Vladimir and said calmly, "The last thing I want to say is Vampire Lord Vladimir's Night Embrace skill. I'm sorry, this skill conflicts with all three of us. We can't work together at all."
Oh?
Bai Xiaowen made a nasal sound. Sid Delafa explained, "Master, the Night Embrace skill requires the raw material of a living person. Naturally, it's impossible to leave the corpses of Abaddon and Paji for use. It also can't allow me to extract resentment before death as raw material. Furthermore, His Excellency Vladimir's Night Embrace skill can only change one target at a time. At the same time, he will enter a weakened state where his health will decrease by 10%. Furthermore, the stronger the target, the longer His Excellency Vladimir's weakened state will last." "I see. Vladimir, do you have anything to say?" Bai Xiaowen asked. Vladimir bowed. "Great ruler, the role of a vampire servant is irreplaceable. They will be given stronger vampire talents to make up for their lost strength to a certain extent. Most importantly, they can retain their memories and intelligence from when they were alive. Isn't this the perfect slave that Lord Ruler needs the most? Your Excellency Vladimir, there's one thing you didn't make clear. After receiving the Night Embrace, humans retain their memories and intelligence, but they also retain their own thoughts. There's no loyalty to speak of." Sid Delafa said coldly. Vladimir smiled and said, "The life and death of every Blood Clan slave is in my hands, and I can make them die with a single thought. With such a threat, I don't have to worry about them not being obedient. I just need to train them a little." Bai Xiaowen organized his thoughts. The four heavenly kings were the leaders of their races. They each had their own advantages when it came to transforming slaves. Abaddon won with numbers and created a large number of bone race slaves. However, the template was one level lower. Pachi needed a lot of materials, but the corpse race slaves he created could be used as meat shields. They were also very strong. Sid Delafa was a versatile combination. It could work with both the bone race and the corpse race. They each had their own needs. The strength of the soul race slaves also had its merits. Vladimir was more alone and couldn't work with the other three. However, the blood race slaves had the most room to operate. Chapter 1655. Bai Xiaowen looked at the four heavenly kings and pondered for a moment. He slowly said, "Vladimir. Yes. From now on, you are not allowed to use Night Embrace without my permission." "Yes." Vladimir did not have any objections. Bai Xiaowen did not explain either. He valued Vladimir's Night Embrace very much. It was precisely because of this that he could not use it casually. Bai Xiaowen then said, "This is your first mission. It includes gathering intelligence and testing your abilities as a clan leader. You have completed the gathering intelligence mission very well. You have even captured a key figure. However, you have not done enough to test your abilities." The four heavenly kings lowered their heads at the same time. Butcher Paji said, "Master, Paji will find elite and normal corpses as soon as possible to test the effects of the mixed suture." Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. "Considering that this is your first mission on your own, it is not bad to have such a completion rate. I suggested this because I hope that you can improve. This way, our forces can continue to grow." The four heavenly kings accepted the order at the same time. The four of them were more or less under pressure from their performance. Their current Lord tier strength came from Bai Xiaowen's death's power. Under their command, there were one or more candidates who could replace their positions. If they did not do well or angered by Xiaowen, they would be beaten down to the ground. They would be demoted from a clan leader to a normal commander. Delifa Sieg asked, "Master, what should we do next?" Bai Xiaowen raised his hand. A rope condensed from true inner force pulled the shivering rabbit demon Zhang Shi over. Delifa Sieg, "I'll leave this demon to you. I want to meet with the Southern Song Prime Minister, Shimi Yuan. However, we cannot attract attention." "Yes, Master." Delifa Sieg's heart trembled. This was a mission that tested one's ability. Currently, the newly established Chanson sect did not have any foundation in the imperial court. There was also no one who could recommend them. It could be said that they were all useless. It was not easy for a commoner to meet the prime minister. Moreover, Shimi Yuan was a powerful prime minister. If he disregarded everything and barged in, of course, he would still be able to meet her, but it would definitely cause a commotion. What Sig Delifa was certain of was that the meeting that his master had mentioned was definitely not at the cost of a riot. A day later, on the Wuyun Mountain outside Linan Prefecture, Bai Xiaowen sized up the bloated creature in front of him. He seemed to see the shadow of the butcher in the beginning. This was an elite-grade stitched monster. Its level was the same as the butcher, level 14. Now we can confirm that butcher's suture skill doesn't require all the corpses of elite enemies. As long as the main body is an elite and the rest are pieced together with normal templates, you can still get an elite stitched monster, Bai Xiaowen said with a nod. Butcher Paji chuckled, looking very pleased with himself. However, the stitch skill takes a long time. It takes an hour to stitch up an elite monster. On the battlefield, there isn't that much time for the butcher to stitch up a large number of monsters. This kind of opportunity can only appear after the battle, when the battlefield is cleaned up. Bai Xiaowen made the final decision. After each battle, the number of butcher's jobs will be determined according to the number of elite templates of the enemy corpses. Abaddon will use the necrosis skill on the remaining normal template corpses to create a sea of skeletons. A sea of skeletons created from normal template corpses would not even be at the normal level. Logically speaking, it would not be as effective as the corpse revival skill that the soul-attracting Banshee chanted. However, the sea of skeletons created through the necrosis skill could be maintained for a long as they were not destroyed. There was no time limit. In the distance, from the direction of Linan City, an angel-like giant that was more than 2.5 meters tall flapped its pale wings and glided over. Sig Delifa flew to the foot of the Wuyun Mountain. She retracted her wings and transformed into a 1.9 meters tall human female before landing on the ground. "Master, I failed." Sig Delifa knelt in front of Bai Xiaowen and said with her head lowered. "Tell me the process," Bai Xiaowen said. In the beginning, Sig Delifa had used the normal method to send a visiting card, in the name of a scholar from the same hometown, hoping to be summoned. However, the visiting card was directly thrown out by the gatekeeper. Later, Sig Delifa changed the name of the rabbit demon, Zhang Shi, in the name of seeking refuge with Shi Xiang. Finally, the gatekeeper was willing to pass on the message. However, the gatekeeper only brought back one sentence from Shi Xiang: "If you have any problems, go to the Privy Council emissary, Li Zhixiao. Do not report beyond your authority." Sig Delifa was really out of options. She had seen Shimi Yuan's palanquin before, but in broad daylight, she could not reveal her true form and forcefully intercept him. It was worth mentioning here that the scholar officials of the Northern Song dynasty rarely used palanquins, because palanquins required manpower. It was not in line with the scholar officials' philosophy to treat humans as livestock and use them as transportation. After the Southern Song dynasty, the practice of using palanquins gradually became popular. Shimi Yuan used palanquins because his apparent age was close to 70 years old. He had to give the impression that he was old, so as not to arouse suspicion. Seeing that Sig Delifa was a little uneasy, Bai Xiaowen said, "Don't be nervous. I know it's not easy for an ordinary person to meet Shimi Yuan. Since this Shi Xiang is arrogant and unwilling to open the door to receive guests, then let him come to see me. Sigdelifa was surprised. How is this possible? Bai Xiaowen just smiled faintly and looked in the direction of Linen. In the distance, a black shadow with bat wings on his back, as thin as a bamboo pole, flew quickly and threw a person who looked like an official to the ground. This was obviously an ordinary person, who looked to be in his 50s. There was no aura of spiritual power on him, and he had already fallen into a coma. Bai Xiaowen said, "This person is called Zhendishio, a famous scholar of Confucianism in the Southern Song dynasty. He has been promoted by Shi Miyuan again and again, and now he is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. However, he is Shi Miyuan's political enemy." Sigdelifa asked, "Since he is a political enemy, why does Shi Miyuan still use him?" Bai Xiaowen said, "As a powerful minister, Shi Miyuan supported the emperor without permission, and the world slandered him. For the sake of his reputation, he strongly advocated Zhu Shi's Confucianism. As a famous scholar of Confucianism, Zhendishio was promoted to an official under this background. Although Zhendishio is an official, he firmly opposes Shi Miyuan's abuse of power. He has resigned many times, but in the end, his official position is getting higher and higher. He is also an anomaly." Vladimir, who was at the side, asked, "Master, do you want to wake this person up?" Bai Xiaowen nodded. "Turn back to your human form first." Vladimir put away his fangs and bat wings, and his body changed from a thin bamboo pole of more than 2 meters to an ordinary person. He waved his hand and brushed Zhendishio's forehead to wake him up. Chapter 1656. Who are you? Kidnapping an official of the imperial court is punishable by death. Facing Bai Xiaowen and his men, Zhendishio was not afraid at all. He even scolded them sternly. If it were any other bandit, they would have been scared stiff by him. However, Bai Xiaowen was very calm. "I am the leader of the Chanson sect. These are my subordinates, the 4 Dharma kings." "Zhendishio?" Bai Xiaowen continued, "The Chanson sect is a hidden branch of the Taoist sect. We actively enter the world and take it as our responsibility to slay demons and devils." He raised his palm and a dazzling lightning flashed slightly. Seeing this, Zhendishio more or less believed him. He hissed, "Since you are Taoist sect cultivators, why did you kidnap me here?" Bai Xiaowen said, "There are demons and devils in the imperial court, and they hold high positions. We want to slay demons and devils, but we are worried that innocent people will be hurt in the dense population of Linen City. Therefore, we need your help to lure out the demons who are pretending to be officials." "There are demons in the imperial court?" "Impossible." Zhendishio shook his head in disbelief. Bai Xiaowen gestured, and Sigdelifa brought the rabbit demon Zhang Shi over. This is a patrol inspector of the Department of Secrets. His name is Zhang Shi, and he works for Li Zhixiao. After Bai Xiaowen introduced him, he suddenly released a strong wave of true inner force to suppress Zhang Shi's aura. "Hurry up and show your true form." Zhang Shi quivered and lay down on the ground. A fat rabbit with big ears appeared. The scene in front of him made Zhendishio dumbfounded. Although he did not know Zhang Shi, the official uniform Zhang Shi was wearing was very difficult to fake. Zhendishio stood up and saluted Bai Xiaowen. "This, Master, since you are here to slay demons and devils, why can't you talk nicely? Why did you have to kidnap me and cause a lot of misunderstandings? If not, I'm afraid you won't believe me. Besides, there are Li Zhixiao's spies in Linen City. I'm afraid we will alert the enemy and ruin the plan." Bai Xiaowen said. Zhendishio agreed and said, "My knowledge is shallow." The 4 heavenly kings, especially Sigdelifa, admired Bai Xiaowen's ability to fool Zhendishio. The 2 of them exchanged names. Zhendishio said, "Taoist LV, you mentioned Li Zhixiao twice just now. Is he the demon that sneaked into the royal court?" Bai Xiaowen shook his head and did not beat around the bush. He said directly, "He's just a henchman of the demons. The real leader of the demons is someone else." Zhendishio's expression changed. Li Zhixiao has always followed Shi Miyuan's lead. Since he's a henchman, then the chief is. That's right, the current prime minister, Shirmi Yuan. Qin Deshio was shocked. The fact that the prime minister was a fiendish demon was simply unimaginable. However, in Qin Deshio's subconscious mind, he believed this because he and Shirmi Yuan were political enemies. He would definitely have the thought of sudden realization, I knew you weren't a good person. No wonder you didn't respect the previous emperor's will and set up a new emperor. You have a very bad conscience. Bai Xiaowen continued, I've also heard of how much Shirmi Yuan values Serene. If Serene writes a letter and uses him as bait to invite him out of Linen Prefecture to discuss matters at Mount Wuyun, he will definitely come. Qin Deshio was displeased. Am I someone who would lower myself to be a thief? Bai Xiaowen shook his head and tried to persuade him, but Qin Deshio was still unwilling to change his mind and pretended to defect to Shirmi Yuan. Bai Xiaowen threatened, if Serene doesn't obey, then I can only search for Serene's seal and forge a letter. He had no other choice. Why was this famous scholar so inflexible and stubborn? Qin Deshio took a step back. Wait, even if I trick Shirmi Yuan to come here, can you guys take him down? You should know that Shirmi Yuan has recruited many experts from the strategy department and the Imperial Palace Guards. Bai Xiaowen said indifferently, how can ordinary people know about Taoist supernatural powers? I can actually kill my way into Linen Prefecture and break into Shirmi Yuan's residence to capture him alive, but I don't want to disturb the people. Moreover, supernatural powers shouldn't be shown in front of ordinary people. As long as Shirmi Yuan comes to Mount Wuyun, even if he brings thousands of troops with him, it'll be easy for me to capture him. Qin Deshio's expression changed several times, but he still agreed to cooperate in the end. The next morning, Shirmi Yuan's carriages left the west gate of Linen Prefecture and went straight to Mount Wuyun. Qin Deshio and 2 servants also greeted him at the foot of Mount Wuyun. Thank you for taking the time to meet me, Sir Jin. After Shirmi Yuan got out of the carriage, he cupped his hands and smiled. It's rare for Brother Jin to invite me to change my mind. No matter how busy I am, I have to squeeze some time out. Qin Deshio forced a smile. Shirmi Yuan waved his hand and dismissed the group of attendants. He only brought a few experts with him and stepped into the east foot of Mount Wuyun with Qin Deshio. They saw a simple and unadorned building in the distance. Shirmi Yuan smiled. Is this the former residence of Shi Dongjai of the Tang dynasty? Qin Deshio nodded. Yes. Shirmi Yuan smiled. Shi Dongjai was the first Shuang Yuan of Linen. I've admired him for a long time. Brother Jin is really a wonderful person to be able to find this place. Qin Deshio kept silent and suddenly sped up his pace. Shirmi Yuan asked curiously, Brother Jin, why are you in a hurry? When visiting the old residences of our predecessors, we should take it slow and leisurely. Suddenly, a voice sounded. Traveling with a gentleman is of course joyful and harmonious. But traveling with a demon is a thorn in the back. Shirmi Yuan's expression changed. The 4 experts beside him stepped forward at the same time and protected him in the center. They shouted, Who is it? Come out. Bai Xiaowen appeared from the top of Shi Dongjai's Jade Ruler Tower in front of them. He stepped on the air like a banished immortal. The 4 heavenly kings came out from the forest at the foot of the mountain at the same time. Bai Xiaowen's eyes of evolution swept over Shirmi Yuan. He shook his head and said, Your strength is mediocre. I made such a big lineup, but I was worried too much. Delifa Sig smiled. Master is lenient in anticipating the enemy. That's why he has established an undefeated record since his debut. Shirmi Yuan's strength was only at the level of a level 16 rare leader. He wasn't even a lord. The 4 experts beside him were all leader-level Aura Chi martial artists. At most, there were 5 leaders. On Bai Xiaowen's side, there were 4 lords. In addition, Bai Xiaowen was in existence comparable to a king. It was indeed an overwhelming advantage. Shirmi Yuan's expression changed, and his mung bean-sized eyes looked around. He couldn't sense the aura of any opponent. It was enough to show that the opponent was strong and undefeatable. Only running away was the best plan. Bai Xiaowen seemed to have seen through his thoughts. He smiled and said, "Shirmi Yuan, don't think about running away, and don't expect reinforcements. I've already set up 2 layers of formations on the east foot of Mount Wuyun. One layer is used to prevent you from escaping, and the other layer is used to isolate sound. Surrender, lest I accidentally kill you." Chapter 1657. The guards by Shirmi Yuan's side were all Jianghu experts that he had spent a great deal of effort to win over. The template of a leader was not any weaker than the branch leaders of the Black Sky cult. In the Jianghu, they could definitely be called first class. Where did this vermin come from, daring to harm the prime minister of the imperial court? Seeing Bai Xiaowen so arrogant, a middle-aged martial artist dressed in Taoist robes and holding a horsetail whisk charged at Bai Xiaowen together with a bald old man. The bald old man's 5 fingers spread open, shooting out a green poisonous light from his fingertips. This poison dragon claw technique was activated by his unique jade phosphorus aura energy, and was definitely extremely sinister. Even the slightest scratch on the opponent's skin would cause the poison to spread. An ordinary person without any spiritual energy resistance would become a poisonous corpse in a few breaths. The horsetail whisk of the Taoist priest was also a special weapon, woven from ice silk. Under the activation of the yin energy, the ice silk extended like a whip, mainly used to bind and obstruct the opponent's movements. These 2 people could be considered to have a tacit understanding of each other. Once the cold air of the horsetail whisk affected the opponent's movements, the bald old man's poison dragon claw would quickly cause damage and weaken the enemy. The 2 did not underestimate Bai Xiaowen's strength, so they used their ultimate techniques right from the start to attack Bai Xiaowen together. But a black shadow flashed, and with an explosion of aura energy, the 2 were sent flying at the same time, vomiting blood. In front of Bai Xiaowen, the black-veiled Sheiji silently appeared. As a suzerain-level martial artist, she was a top expert of the Jianghu, and the first clash of aura energy was without any fancy moves. "You are Sheiji, the right protector of the Black Sky cult, Sheiji." The bald old man and Taoist priest horsetail whisk exclaimed one after another. The expressions of the other 2 guards of Shirmi Yuan changed at the same time. Hasn't the Black Sky cult already been destroyed? It is said that Sheiji has already died in battle. Sheiji was silent. Shirmi Yuan's expression wildly changed. "You are the remnants of the Black Sky cult? This old man and you have minded our own business. You dare to ambush me like this. Are you not afraid that the experts of the Imperial City Division and Strategy Division will surround you and completely wipe out your last remaining forces?" Bai Xiaowen said indifferently, "The Black Sky sect was destroyed by me. I'll say it again, we are not the Black Sky sect, but the Longevity sect." Behind Shirmi Yuan, the 4 suzerains revealed their true forms. Abaddon was already 3 meters tall on his skeletal warhorse, but when he sat on the warhorse, he was almost 5 meters tall. He was as tall as a 2-story building. He raised his hand, and a 30 feet long and as thick as a bowl appeared in his palm. Every step the skeletal warhorse took made Abaddon's aura grow stronger. The other 2 Jianghu elites who were protecting Shirmi Yuan were loyal and did not try to escape. Under the pressure of Abaddon's increasingly powerful aura, the 2 of them shouted and pounced forward. Abaddon's lance suddenly swept out, and a majestic wind pressure surged. The momentum of the 2 Jianghu elites was obstructed, and their speed decreased sharply. Then, Abaddon's lance shook the ground. Their bodies went numb, and their bodies were sent flying, temporarily losing the ability to move. His pale white wings flapped, and Sig flew out in a Delphi. His spiritual spear pierced through the chest of one of the elites at an astonishing speed, as if he was a fly, and nailed him to the ground. However, Vladimir's flying speed was even faster. With a flap of his bat wings, the other elite's vision blurred, and then he felt a pain in his abdomen. When he looked down, a long arm as thin as a bamboo pole had already pierced through his abdomen. Butcher Paji swung his iron chain, and a hook flew towards Shirmi Yuan. After his basic attributes had been greatly increased, Butcher's iron chain's speed and accuracy had also increased by a lot. Moreover, with the addition of spiritual power, it had a strange suction force. Shi Yuan had clearly used his strength to move horizontally, but under the flying iron chain, his horizontal movement was inexplicably slowed down. Butcher's iron chain immediately pierced through his waist and dragged him over. Butcher had used the deformed arm on his back to throw the iron chain. At the same time he used his strength to drag Shi Yuan over, his two thick arms impatiently pulled out two kitchen knives and stared at Shi Yuan, who was flying over, like a tiger eyeing its prey. Clang clang clang, after a round of wild chopping, wood shavings flew everywhere. Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly. His brain is still not sharp enough. It turned out that Butcher had not dragged Shi Yuan's real body over, but an avatar carved out of a piece of wood. Butcher clearly had the strength of an overlord, but he had been deceived by Shi Yuan, a rare leader, with his demonic arts. It was a bit embarrassing. At this moment, Sheiji had already killed the horsetail whisk Taoist priest and the bald old man, who had just been injured and spat out blood. "Master, where is Shi Yuan?" Delifa Sig asked. With such a grand lineup, if Shi Yuan had still managed to escape, then it would be too inconceivable. More importantly, Shi Yuan's identity was special. If he had escaped, then he would have immediately activated the spying agencies, the experts of the Imperial City Division and the Strategy Division, to hunt down and exterminate the Chanson sect. Even the Great Song Imperial Army would have been mobilized. Although it might not have been a threat to the lives of Bai Xiaowen and the others, it would still be a big problem. Bai Xiaowen smiled and pointed to the ground, then said, "It's fine. With the formation blocking, he won't be able to escape." Abaddon's lance suddenly slammed into the ground. Immediately, it was as if a large amount of strong acid had been spilled on the ground. The ground bubbled, and a gray mist quickly spread and churned. This was Abaddon's skill, large-scale blasphemy. After becoming an overlord, the blasphemy expanded at an astonishing speed. Furthermore, as long as Abaddon continued to inject spiritual energy, the area would continue to expand. Of course, the larger the area, the more spiritual energy it would consume. Currently, maintaining the blasphemy area within a radius of 1,000 meters was considered a normal consumption. It would not deplete his spiritual energy in a short period of time. In the distance, a pillar of light from a formation talisman shot into the sky. When Shi Yuan, who was hiding underground, escaped the blasphemy area, he finally triggered the formation that Bai Xiaowen had set up in advance. A clump of green broke out of the ground and grew wildly, quickly transforming into a towering tree. On the tree trunk, there were clear facial features such as eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. One could vaguely make out the outline of Shi Yuan's face. Countless branches wildly lashed out, slapping towards the formation's pillar of light. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, still resisting stubbornly, "I should teach you a lesson." Lightning flickered in his palm, and a bolt of primordial lightning furiously struck down. Shi Yuan cried out in pain. Leaves rustled and fell, and a huge scorched crack appeared on the tree trunk. Lightning techniques were the nemesis of tree demons like Shi Yuan. Apart from the evil-destroying damage itself, the damage caused by lightning techniques would effectively prevent tree demons from self-healing. For wood-type demons, this was simply a disaster. Shi Yuan's demonic energy was greatly depleted. He hurriedly withdrew his huge demonic body and transformed back into an old man. He knelt on the ground and shouted, "Immortal Elder, please spare my life." Chapter 1658. Shi Yuan gave up resisting. The pale wings of the Sigdelifa flapped, and it flew in front of Shi Yuan. Shi Yuan lowered his head and allowed the Sigdelifa to imbue him with spiritual power, sealing his demonic power, and escorting him in front of Bai Xiaowen. "Immortal Elder, you didn't get rid of me immediately, so there must be something you want me to do?" Shi Yuan's mind was quite nimble. "Please tell me, Immortal Elder, I will definitely do it." Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and said, "No rush. Let's deal with the reinforcements you invited first." Shi Yuan was shocked, and so were the 4 heavenly kings. Butcher Pachi scratched his barren head. Oh? You still have reinforcements? Shirmi Yuan forced a smile. Immortal Elder, you must be joking. How could I have reinforcements? Bai Xiaowen said indifferently, when I first appeared, you crushed something in your sleeve. You might be able to fool others, but you can't fool me. You saw that the situation was bad and pretended to surrender, but in reality, you were just waiting for your backer to arrive and stalling for time. Shirmi Yuan was shocked. You even know about Lord Yushan? Who told you? Li Zhixiao, Liang Chengda, or Mose? Bai Xiaowen said, you don't need to guess blindly. When I first saw you, I knew that you had a backer. Otherwise, with your strength, how could you monopolize the authority of the great Song dynasty? Shirmi Yuan was only a rare leader-level tree demon. In the Shao dynasty, lord-level demons were not rare. For example, when Bai Xiaowen and Chen Rong first met at the ancient Buddha temple, it was because they killed an injured lord-level tree demon. Since lord-level demons were not rare, then there must be lord-level demons among the demon factions that could use the great Song dynasty as their base. Shirmi Yuan trembled slightly. Bai Xiaowen said, you just said Lord Yushan. Is he also a demon? How long until he arrives? Shirmi Yuan trembled as he shook his head. I don't know either. Lord Yushan was a great demon I met by chance when I first transformed. His true form was that of a tiger. I made an agreement with Lord Yushan that I would give him 10 people to eat every month. He gave me a bone talisman and said that if I crushed it in an emergency, he would rush over to ensure my safety. Is this your first time using a bone talisman? Bai Xiaowen asked. Shirmi Yuan nodded. Bai Xiaowen raised his eyebrows. Very well. Let's wait for the arrival of that Lord Yushan. It'll also dispel your superfluous thoughts. With that, he summoned all 4 heavenly kings back. Qin Dexiu, who was hiding in the Jade Ruler building, ran over. The demon has been subdued. Why didn't you get rid of him? Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, don't be impatient. This Shirmi Yuan is only a small demon. There are still big demons behind him. Once the greater demon is destroyed, I have my own plans. Qin Dexiu said, listening to Taoist priest's tone, it seems that you don't intend to kill Shirmi Yuan? Bai Xiaowen said, keeping Shirmi Yuan alive is more useful. How can a dignified Taoist priest wallow in the mire with a demon? Qin Dexiu said agitatedly. He seemed to be somewhat angry. This is the behavior of an evil demon. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and waved his sleeve gently. A stream of true inner force imprisoned Qin Dexiu. He pointed to his chest and said with a smile, my heart is clear. There is no need to argue with you. An hour later, the sky above the 5-cloud mountain was suddenly covered by dark clouds and a fierce wind blew. A tiger's roar shook the mountain forest. Bai Xiaowen sat in a corner of the cornice of the Jade Ruler building. His white clothes fluttered in the wind. He looked at Shirmi Yuan, who was under the Jade Ruler building. His movements were restrained and he was trembling. He said loudly, this little ability to stir up trouble is not enough to scare people. Come out. If you want to save Shirmi Yuan, you have to show your true abilities. The dark clouds in the sky suddenly receded. A burly middle-aged man in yellow clothes appeared under the Jade Ruler building. This person, or rather, this demon, was Lord Yushan in his human form. Bai Xiaowen's eyes of evolution swept over. He nodded and smiled. Now that's more like it. Lord Yushan, Lord level 16, race, demon/beast demon, attributes, 220 STR, 135 DEX, 190 STR, 104 INT, health, 100%, spiritual energy, 3500. The tiger demon named Lord Yushan did not know that his strength had been seen through. He roared in a low voice and said with great power, which faction do you belong to? Shirmi Yuan is under my protection. Let him go immediately. Otherwise, I will eat you in one bite. Bai Xiaowen stood up on the cornice and said, I see that your strength is not bad. Are you willing to pledge your allegiance to me? I just happen to be lacking a mount. In the world of evolvers, Bai Xiaowen, as an advanced summoner, could sign a summoning contract with other non-human races with the subjective consent of the other party. Its effect was similar to the contract items of the awakened stage. It was similar to how he had obtained the loyalty of the Wrath Claw. There was also another advantage. The skill bar disappeared. Establishing a summoning contract did not need to occupy the skill bar. Correspondingly, the summoning contract needed to occupy the upper limit of the spiritual energy value. This was also a characteristic of the evolver stage. The upper limit of the spiritual energy value was used to restrict the upper limit of the advanced summoner profession. Lord Yushan's two yellow and black vertical pupils suddenly stared at Bai Xiaowen. He said coldly, "Human, you are courting death." However, after saying those words, Lord Yushan immediately fled. He did not even look back as he instantly flew several dozen meters away. Bai Xiaowen was speechless. A rune light pillar rose. The four symbols formation appeared again and blocked Lord Yushan. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and released the four heavenly kings. This formation is easy to enter, but difficult to leave. You did not notice the existence of the formation. The moment you stepped in, you were destined to not be able to escape. Choose for yourself. Be my mount, or die. When he had called back the four heavenly kings and Sheiji, leaving only Bai Xiaowen alone, he had wanted to show weakness to the enemy so that Lord Yushan could be at ease and appear boldly. Faced with Bai Xiaowen's question, Lord Yushan's answer was a tiger's roar and suddenly changed into his original form. This was a giant tiger that was 20 feet long. Its body was covered in black and yellow patterns. Its pair of fierce eyes were full of murderous intent. However, after staring at the four heavenly kings who had just appeared, the giant tiger's fierce eyes and murderous intent restrained a lot. Human cultivator, I have no enmity with you. This time, I will take a step back. I will leave this tree demon to you. I will not interfere. If you go too far, I will not hesitate to fight you to the death. These words were powerful and resonant. In fact, he had already admitted defeat. Moreover, the words "fight to the death" had already placed him in a weak position. Bai Xiaowen smiled. You can try. The four heavenly kings were immortal existences that relied on the appearance of the Grim Reaper. Even if one or two of them were killed by Lord Yushan, they could still be revived by Bai Xiaowen. Of course, dying once would cause some memory loss. Therefore, it was better not to die if possible. However, no matter what, this was a relatively small price to pay. Unless Lord Yushan had the ability to kill or severely injure Bai Xiaowen, there was no need to talk about fighting to the death. Chapter 1659. The tiger demon, Lord Yushan, was forced into a corner. It suddenly roared and pounced toward Bai Xiaowen instead of retreating. Butcher Paji's muscular body blocked in front of it. In terms of the size of a tiger, Lord Yushan could be considered a giant tiger. In terms of the size of a human, Butcher Paji could also be considered a giant. Of course, Butcher wasn't human. He just had a human-like appearance. Bam! With a muffled sound, the two giants collided. Butcher's bucket-thick arms bulged with muscles, and his thick legs blocked the attack. However, in front of the powerful impact of Lord Yushan, he still slid backward, plowing two deep gullies in the mountain rocks. Butcher couldn't be blamed. He was only level 14, while Lord Yushan was a level 16 lord. Of course, Butcher wasn't fighting alone. Abaddon raised his 3-meter-long spear and urged his skeletal warhorse to charge forward. A huge black arrow headed straight for Lord Yushan's weak right abdomen. On the opposite side, Sig Delafa also waved its spiritual spear and flapped its wings to attack Lord Yushan's left abdomen. The most sinister one was the vampire lord, Vladimir. He had his eyes on the tiger demon's anus. Lord Yushan was attacked by 3 lords at the same time. He had no choice but to give up on wrestling with Butcher. With a roar, a strange wind suddenly appeared on both sides of the ground. These two strange winds were in the shape of tornadoes and contained a powerful suction force. Abaddon and Sigdelpha were both affected by the strange tornadoes. However, Sigdelpha had wings, and Abaddon was immune to the army's charge. Both of them quickly broke away from the strange winds. Lord Yushan's huge tail was like a pair of scissors, twisting horizontally. This tail twisting was really fast and ruthless. Vladimir, who was standing behind it, couldn't dodge in time even with his outstanding agility. However, Vladimir directly transformed into a bat. A group of black bats with golden patterns scattered in all directions and reformed into Vladimir's body not far away. With two whooshing sounds, Abaddon's lance and Sigdelpha's spiritual spear stabbed Lord Yushan from both sides. However, the power of their attacks was greatly reduced by Lord Yushan's tough fur, so their wounds weren't very deep. Compared to Lord Yushan's enormous body, it was no different from being stung by a wasp. Although the four lords were 2 levels lower than Lord of the Mountain Crossing, they had the advantage in numbers. Furthermore, they had the Butcher as a powerful meat shield, so they were able to suppress Lord of the Mountain Crossing. Below the Jade Ruler building, Shirmiyuan watched the scene in panic. Then, he carefully raised his head and glanced at Bai Xiaowen, who hadn't made a move yet. In his heart, Lord Yushan was already an unreachable great demon who dominated a region. And this mysterious sect master of the longevity sect was even more powerful than Lord Yushan. Bai Xiaowen was well aware of Shirmiyuan's little trick. He had yet to make a move. If Bai Xiaowen made a move, Mr. Yushan would be defeated even faster. However, Bai Xiaowen didn't make a move, which gave Shirmiyuan an even more mysterious guess. In fact, Bai Xiaowen had been using his true inner force to maintain the operation of the 2 layers of formations, so the burden was definitely not light. Here was the problem of the formation's consumption. If a suitable location of the ley lines was found and the formation was set up along the ley lines, using the ley line's spirit chi, there would be no need to consume the host's energy. The power of the formation could be maintained for 10 or even 100 years without disappearing. However, if the formation was hastily set up and couldn't use the ley line's power, it would have to rely on the person setting up the formation's own spirit chi. From the beginning to the end, Bai Xiaowen had only used 1 round of primordial lightning to force Shirmiyuan to give up resisting. That was all. The battle between the 4 lords and Lord Yushan lasted for more than 10 minutes. Bai Xiaowen summoned Sheiji. During this time, he had already used the Eye of Evolution to find the vital point where Lord Yushan's spirit chi gathered. It wasn't the heart or the throat, but the huge cranial cavity that was protected by the sturdy tiger skull. Next, as long as Sheiji participates in the battle and finds an opportunity to stab the tiger demon's ear with the invisible blade, I will be able to severely injure or even kill it. This thought flashed through Bai Xiaowen's mind. However, Bai Xiaowen's action of summoning Sheiji made the 4 lords somewhat resistant. Butcher Paji was still blocking the tiger demon's main attacks. He grunted and said, "Master, Paji can do it." Delpha Sig followed and said, "Master, we can take care of this tiger demon. Please give us a little more time." Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and thought, and understood the 4 lords' thoughts. This was the first battle between the 4 lords. The battle with Shirmiyuan just now was just a warm-up. It couldn't be considered the real battle. The 4 lords didn't want to leave the impression of being incompetent in Bai Xiaowen's mind. This was especially so for Delpha Sig previously. She was given the task of visiting Shirmiyuan, but she was unable to do anything. Since Bai Xiaowen could take back the death god's power from the 4 of them at any time and select other leaders, the 4 lords were very eager to prove their abilities. Now that the 4 of them were besieging the tiger demon, it could be considered a contribution. After fighting for a long time, they had already suppressed the tiger demon. How could they be willing to let Sheiji take away the biggest contribution? Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. Sheiji didn't make a move. She stood silently beside Bai Xiaowen. Sigdelpha and the other 3 heaved a sigh of relief. Then, the 4 of them simultaneously erupted with powerful spirit chi, trading injury for injury with Lord Yushan regardless of the cost. For example, the butcher used his two thick and short arms to force Lord Yushan's upper and lower jaws, preventing him from biting. He didn't care that his chest and abdomen had been torn open by Lord Yushan's giant claws. Dirty blood slowly flowed out from the wounds. There was also the Blood Clan Lord Vladimir, who didn't care about being whipped by the tiger's tail and attacked Lord Yushan's genitals. Sig Delifa and Abaddon, who withstood Lord Yushan's wind-type demonic arts and had cracks on their armor, still wanted to stab Lord Yushan's abdomen with their spears. After the four lords fought with their lives on the line, Lord Yushan finally couldn't hold on any longer. His health started to drop rapidly. It was useless to use demonic power to protect his body. After his demonic power was broken, he could only endure the damage with his flesh and blood. Soon, Lord Yushan was covered in blood and lay on the ground on his last breath. It had been forcefully exhausted to such a state by the four lords. "Well done," Bai Xiaowen praised. At the same time, he took out 1,000 soul essences from Death's countenance. With a wave of his hand, the soul essences turned into black mist and surged into the bodies of the four lords. Their injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Their tired minds were also quickly recovering. The benefits of the soul essences weren't as simple as healing injuries. They could also slightly increase the strength of the four lords. This increase was mainly reflected in the soft aspects of their strength, such as their combat specialization, their understanding of skills, and so on. It was similar to a weakened version of the light ball of enlightenment, but it wasn't the same. The four lords knelt down at the same time and thanked him. Bai Xiaowen looked at Lord Yushan. "This is your last chance. Surrender or die." End of chapter. Chapter 1660. Although the Lord of the Mountains was dying, the ferocity in its yellow and black eyes didn't diminish. Faced with Bai Xiaowen's question, it stretched its neck and wanted to bite him, but Abaddon's lance was pressed against its chin. Delifa Sig said, "Master, this tiger demon is still unconvinced. Why don't you give me some time to slowly train it and refine its temper? Maybe it will submit." Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, "Forget it. This tiger demon has eaten countless people. It's hard to train its ferocity. If we keep it, we have to be wary of its betrayal. It's better to kill it." When summoners subdued beast-type monsters, they needed a certain amount of luck to ensure their loyalty. When Bai Xiaowen subdued the Wrath Claw, it was because the Wrath Claw's hatred wasn't on Bai Xiaowen. On the contrary, it was grateful to Bai Xiaowen. Plus, Bai Xiaowen's summoning profession made it submit to him. Now, even if he subdued the Lord of the Mountains and controlled its life and death, he couldn't use it without worry. If the tiger demon held a grudge and waited for an opportunity to take revenge, it would be bad for Bai Xiaowen's plans. Abaddon obeyed and stabbed his lance into the Lord of the Mountain's throat, taking away its last health points and killing it on the spot. As a Lord-level monster, the Lord of the Mountain's body was full of treasures. Delifa Sig skinned the tiger demon and pulled out its tendons. Bai Xiaowen took out a shining white ball that was as light as a feather from the tiger demon's brain. He could feel that it contained surging demonic power. Obviously, it was the essence of the Lord of the Mountain's demonic power. Bai Xiaowen scanned it with his eye of evolution and identified it. Tiger Demon's inner core, dark gold level 7 spiritual material. It's very attractive to terrestrial beasts or beasts. It can also be used as medicine. Bai Xiaowen's heart skipped a beat. He summoned the Wrath Claw. When the Wrath Claw came out, it was still lazily working. Suddenly, its nose twitched and it looked at Bai Xiaowen's right hand. "Boss, where did you get the ball in your hand? It looks delicious." Bai Xiaowen shook his head and smiled. "You're lucky. Open your mouth." The Wrath Claw opened its mouth. Bai Xiaowen flicked the tiger demon's inner core into the Wrath Claw's mouth. Rage Claw stuck out his tongue and licked his mouth. "I didn't taste anything and swallowed it." "Boss, any more?" Bai Xiaowen kicked Wrath Claw. A human-like expression appeared on Angry Claw's face. Just as it was about to howl, it suddenly hugged its stomach and curled up. Waves of demonic power spread out from Rage Claw's body. Through the telepathic connection, Angry Claw continuously transmitted a series of urgent thoughts. Ouch 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 ouch, Bai Xiaowen shook his head. He wasn't worried about the Wrath Claw dying. After all, the Wrath Claw had the awakening skill of the Wolf Valley. When the Wrath Claw was on the verge of death, it would be directly sent back to the Wolf Valley. It wouldn't really die and would only be weakened for a period of time. After rolling a dozen times, the Wrath Claw stood up. Wha! Sig, Delifa, and the others all exclaimed in shock. The Wrath Claw's body was much larger than before. His body, which was originally the size of an adult water buffalo, was now about the same size as Lord Yushan. The Wrath Claw's aura had also increased significantly. Bai Xiaowen's eyes of evolution scanned the area. Wrath Claw, Lord level 14, race, Demon/Beast Demon, attributes, Strength 180, Agility 220, Constitution 144, Spirit 91, Health, 100% Spiritual Energy Value, 2800 inch. These attributes, this spiritual energy. It's even stronger than the 4 heavenly kings. Bai Xiaowen was a little surprised. He didn't expect the Wrath Claw to be stronger than the 4 heavenly kings after being promoted to Lord. It was even stronger than Sig, Delifa. Sig, Delifa, on the other hand, was more open-minded and said, Master, the Wrath Claw has grown many times in the awakened stage. Although it didn't have the template of a lord, its strength wasn't inferior to a lord at all. Now that it has the Tiger Demon's inner core and has been officially promoted to lord, its improvement will definitely be greater than the 4 of us. Bai Xiaowen nodded. The growth of the awakened stage was, of course, not useless. The current Wrath Claw's attributes and spiritual energy value were much stronger than a normal level 14 lord. It was comparable to a level 15 or even a level 16 lord. It was a genuine rare lord. Even your race has changed. Did you awaken any special abilities? Otherwise, you won't be able to live up to the word demon, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. The Wrath Claw howled, and its body shrunk rapidly. Its fur fell off, and it turned into a 1.9-meter tall, slender, middle-aged man with a full beard. It was the kind that didn't wear any clothes. Its chest, armpits, and certain parts of its body were full of fur. Boss. My appearance isn't bad, right? The Wrath Claw laughed and flexed its arms, showing off its biceps. You can transform? Bai Xiaowen was a little surprised, but then he said, hurry up and transform your clothes. Don't walk your bird here. Ah, sorry, I'm used to it. The Wrath Claw patted its head, and its demonic aura flowed slightly, transforming into a set of rough leather robes, just like the Mongolians of the northern desert. Bai Xiaowen didn't care about the Wrath Claw's aesthetics and continued to ask, have you awakened any spell-like talents? Yes. The Wrath Claw's fingertips flashed, and a small whirlwind flew out from its palm. It quickly expanded and turned into a sickle-like whirlwind, cutting a path forward. Wind attribute talent. It should have been affected by the Mountain Lord. Bai Xiaowen thought for a while and said, Wrath Claw, you are the core of the Wolf Valley. Now that your race has become a demon, a beast demon, I don't know if it will affect the other creatures in the Wolf Valley. The Awakened Realm, Aaron Realm World. Little June was wearing armor and carrying a sledgehammer. She was riding a mount wolf, running on the frozen ground. All of a sudden, the wolf came to a stop. What's wrong, Little Blind? Little June jumped down and stroked the mount wolf's smooth fur in confusion. From the front, it could be seen that there was something wrong with the mount wolf's eyes. Its pupils were pale. Little Blind suddenly looked up to the sky and howled. Its body instantly expanded, as if an invisible force was being poured into its body. Little Blind then opened its mouth and suddenly spat out a transparent ripple in the air in the shape of a sickle, cutting a thick tree in half. Little June was surprised, but she clapped her hands and laughed, amazing, Little Blind. You can actually use wind blade magic. Little Blind rolled its eyes and conveyed its thoughts through telepathy. It's a bloodline ability, not magic. Little June didn't care so much. She turned around and rode on the Mount Wolf again. Little blind, wind attribute magic has a speed increase spell, right? Give me one. Let's hurry to Northrend. Little blind muttered, and a faint ripple in the air suddenly rose from its four paws, as if wind was wrapping around its paws. Its running speed suddenly increased greatly, and as little June clapped her hands, it kept running forward. Chapter 1661. Shirmi Yuan, the Prime Minister of the Song Dynasty, a rare leader-level tree demon. He was an important figure in Xiaowei. However, at this moment, Shirmi Yuan felt that he was pitiful, weak, and helpless in front of the overlords of Chanson men and the stares of a group of big shots. If I say I'm willing to surrender now, is it too late? Bai Xiaowen said lightly. You bowed to the Jin kingdom and collected wealth from the people. You gave out banknotes, causing the prices of goods to skyrocket and the people to suffer. In order to befriend the demon, Lord Yushan, you sent 10 living people to him every month. Your crimes are too numerous to be recorded. Shirmi Yuan shouted, Leader, I'm innocent. With the military power of the Song dynasty, we can't compete with the Jin kingdom. If we don't pay the money, how can we protect our kingdom? Giving the Jin kingdom money, the Song dynasty's finances are in deficit. We can't not make up for it from the people. As for the blood and food for Lord Yushan, they are all criminals tried by the Supreme Court and captured bandits. There are no innocent people. Bai Xiaowen smiled, so you're a good prime minister. Shirmi Yuan lowered his head and said, Not really. I'm just a prime minister with bad luck. With the situation like this, it would be difficult for anyone to do better than me. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. He wanted to beat Shirmi Yuan up and subdue him, but he didn't expect Shirmi Yuan to have so many excuses. Alright, let's not talk about other things for now. If you're willing to surrender, then work for the Chanson men, Bai Xiaowen said directly. Yes. Yes, yes. Shirmi Yuan said yes. Leader, what does our Chanson men want to do? Give me a plan, I promise to follow it. Shirmi Yuan felt that he had just escaped death. Bai Xiaowen was speechless when he saw Shirmi Yuan acting like he was familiar with him. So soon, he's our Chanson men? This tree demon really has no bottom line. But it's good that he doesn't have a bottom line. As long as he knows how to submit to the strong, that's enough. Bai Xiaowen already has 6 lords under him. Shirmi Yuan should know how powerful he is. With his hands behind his back, Bai Xiaowen looked up at the northern sky at a 45-degree angle and said slowly, The goal of Chanson faction is to chase away the Tatars and restore China. Shirmi Yuan was stunned. He didn't expect Chanson men, who seemed to be unscrupulous, to have such lofty ideals. It was so bright that it was unbelievable. Shouldn't such a powerful organization that hides in the shadows aim to control the world? Shirmi Yuan's thoughts were actually quite close to the truth. Of course, he didn't dare to say it out loud. Bai Xiaowen added, If you work for the longevity sect from now on, I won't mistreat you. As he spoke, he took out a piece of animated spiritual wood. To Shirmi Yuan, gold-ranked spirit materials were truly not considered anything rare. However, animated spirit wood was different. This type of animated spiritual wood could only be obtained from the corpse of a tree ant that was above the commander tier. Looking at the abundance of spiritual energy in this piece of animated spiritual wood, it was most likely from a Lord tier tree ant. Lord-level tree ant. This was Shirmi Yuan's goal. For a moment, Shirmi Yuan felt a chill run down his spine. Sect Master, what do you mean by this? Shirmi Yuan thought to himself. You're probably warning me not to have any evil thoughts. Bai Xiaowen actually had 2 meanings. One was a warning, and the other was a temptation. He tossed the animated spiritual wood to Shirmi Yuan and said calmly, This piece of animated spiritual wood is yours. Shirmi Yuan hurriedly said, Thank you, Sect Master. A gold-ranked spirit material wasn't enough to move him. However, since the other party had given him a reward, it meant that he was temporarily safe. Of course, a gold-ranked spirit material like animated spiritual wood was beneficial to Shirmi Yuan. It was a pretty good reward. Bai Xiaowen said, when I killed the ancient locust tree demon, I also obtained 1,000-year locust tree heart. Shi Miyuan's eyes widened. 1,000-year locust tree heart was equivalent to a beast demon's inner core. It was the accumulation of a beast demon's essence. To a rare commander tier treant like him, it was definitely a great supplement. It was almost equivalent to the tiger demon's inner core to the wrath claw. Shi Miyuan's breathing became hurried. However, he was still afraid of Bai Xiaowen's power and didn't dare to speak rashly. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, if you do things to my satisfaction, I can bestow that 1,000-year locust tree heart to you and help you reach a higher level. Shi Miyuan knelt on the ground. Please do not worry, Sect Master. This lowly one will do my best for Changqing Gate until my death. If Bai Xiaowen hadn't given him that piece of animated spiritual wood, Shi Miyuan would have thought that the other was just painting a pie in the sky. However, with that piece of animated spiritual wood from the Lord Tree Demon as evidence, the possibility that Bai Xiaowen had the 1,000-year locust tree heart was extremely high. It was almost certain. This wasn't the same as painting a pie in the sky, but a real temptation. Bai Xiaowen nodded in satisfaction. It was inevitable that Shi Miyuan would be unwilling to do things if he used force to subdue him. However, if he used benefits to tempt him, he would be able to display 120% of his enthusiasm. Shi Miyuan, I saw you cast an incarnation Yao art before. Bai Xiaowen asked. Yes, Sect Master Darren, Shi Miyuan said, this Yao art is called Wood Incarnation. However, it is only a fragment. This lowly one only had a small accomplishment after great effort. Without waiting for Bai Xiaowen to speak, Shi Miyuan took out a piece of dried tree bark from his bosom and handed it to Bai Xiaowen. Sect Master Darren, please take a look. Bai Xiaowen took the tree bark. When he saw the cross-section of the tree bark, his heart moved slightly. When he had killed the ancient locust tree Yao, he had obtained a piece of tree bark that also had the remnant of the wood incarnation Yao art carved onto it. Bai Xiaowen's memory was extremely good. The uneven cross-section of that remnant piece of tree bark was imprinted in his mind. At this time, it was a perfect match with this piece of tree bark in front of him. In other words, if the two pieces of tree bark were put together, he could obtain an even more complete version of the wood incarnation Yao art. There was no change in Bai Xiaowen's expression. He nodded slightly and said, it really is a fragment, but it has some good points. I will take this piece of tree bark. After spending some time, I will help you complete it. After you have done well, I will pass the complete version of the wood incarnation Yao art to you. Shi Miyuan did not suspect anything and hurriedly knelt in thanks. Bai Xiaowen put away the tree bark and said in the end, now, we can enter the main topic. Shi Miyuan hurriedly asked, what does Sect Master Darren want me to do? Bai Xiaowen pointed at Abaddon. This is one of the generals under the command of my long life sect, he is called Guo Yin. Think of a way to arrange for him to have a position in the Jiangbei army. It does not matter how many soldiers he has, even if it is an empty camp, but he must be in charge of a camp alone. Guo Yin? Shi Miyuan jumped in fright. He had heard Gu as Gu. He thought that this name was too domineering and would be slightly inappropriate. But since the sect master had spoken, how could he dare to object? He could only accept. Chapter 1662. Shi Miyuan thought for a while and said, Sect Master, it's not difficult to arrange a military post for Guo Yin, but you can't rashly assign him too high. Otherwise, people will criticize you. I'm not a man of my word in the imperial court. There are many so-called officials and scholars who regard me as a traitor. Bai Xiaowen thought to himself, you are a traitor. Why are you afraid of others talking about you? However, on the surface, Bai Xiaowen was still very calm. He nodded slightly and said, speak your mind. Shi Miyuan said, I can set up a new loyal and brave battalion in the Huaidong army. Guo Yin will be the commander of the loyal and brave battalion. Commander? Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. The military posts of the southern Song dynasty were not randomly assigned. the military posts were divided into two categories, rank officer and rank officer. Rank officer was equivalent to the modern military rank, while rank officer was equivalent to the position. There were a total of 52 ranks in the Southern Song dynasty. However, the Southern Song dynasty valued the civil and despised the military. No matter how high the rank of a general was, he was not higher than the civil officials. Especially the generals who led the troops outside, many of them were below the 5th rank. Naturally, they were controlled by the civil officials. For example, Yufei enlisted in the army at the age of 20 and made a lot of contributions. It was not until 6 years later that he became a rank 7 martial scholar, 40th rank. In terms of military rank, he was promoted by 13 ranks because the lowest rank was rank 9 Qing Xinlong, 52nd rank. Commander was a position. Corresponding to military rank, it was the position of a rank 7 martial scholar. Shi Miyuan thought that Bai Xiaowen was dissatisfied with the low rank. He said with a bitter face, "Sect master, placing someone in the army for no reason is already the limit. For this, I have to forge a series of meritorious deeds and promotion records of Guao Yin. There are more than a dozen official procedures that I have to go through." Bai Xiaowen was slightly surprised. He did not expect the Song dynasty's system to be so detailed. As the prime minister, it was not easy to appoint a rank 7 officer. In fact, the main reason was that Abaddon appeared out of thin air and did not participate in the military selection. There was no such person in the army before. The difficulty of the arrangement was like appointing a commoner to be a deputy county head in modern times. There were many systems and rules that were obstacles. Of course, the Song system was very detailed. From another perspective, it was redundant officials. There were many officials but few affairs. It was very inconvenient to manage many things. In the end, it became a situation. Huaidong loyal and brave battalion commander. Who's your superior? Bai Xiaowen asked. Shi Miyuan said, "It's Huaidong's resettlement commissioner Lu Gu." He sounded like a civil official when he heard the official title. Bai Xiaowen asked again. Sure enough, this was the case. Lu. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything else. Instead, he said, "All right, you can go now. Get the Bone King in official position as soon as possible." Shi Miyuan hesitated and said, "Honorable sect master, that Jindishio already knows my identity as a fiendish demon. If I let him return to the imperial court, it's hard to say what will happen." It was obvious that Shi Miyuan wanted to kill him. He wanted Bai Xiaowen to silence him. Bai Xiaowen said, "Don't worry. I will make this person disappear. However, this person went missing while inviting you to the appointment, so it's inevitable that others will suspect you." Shi Miyuan said confidently, "Absolutely no problem." When Lord Yushan arrived, didn't the sky fill with black clouds and strange winds appear? The 4 experts by my side also died. I can say that I encountered a tiger demon. Jindishio was eaten by the tiger demon. Later, a Taoist expert passed by and saved me. That was why I survived. Lord Yushan's skeleton can also be used as evidence. Bai Xiaowen nodded. The Shi Miyuan's brain was quite sharp. A fiendish demon who wasn't smart wouldn't be able to get to the position of prime minister and not fall for decades. It's so troublesome to drop an official of the 7th rank out of nowhere. It's so easy to make a court official disappear. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and sighed again. In fact, although the system of the Song dynasty was detailed, it was far from being complete, let alone perfect. After controlling Shi Miyuan, the prime minister, the following things would be much easier. First of all, Shi Miyuan, as the leader of the fiendish demons, gathered the 3 ferocious demons led by Li Zhixiao. Then, Bai Xiaowen led the 4 heavenly kings, Sheiji, and the Wrath Claw to appear. After a little deterrence, these demons submitted. In fact, the safest way was to let Vladimir turn them into vampires' slaves. However, the Night Embrace skill was only useful against humans. It was ineffective against demons. Therefore, they could only use this method to intimidate them. 2 days later, Shi Miyuan asked Li Zhixiao to successfully forge the resume of an officer named Gulong, Ao Tian. His promotion process could be investigated in detail. Here, even in the feudal dynasty, it wasn't a big deal for the people to have the word Long in their names. For example, Yu Fei's double spear Luwen Long, in the Qing dynasty's Yu Cheng Long, etc. If dragons were not allowed, then there wouldn't be the surname of Long among the 100 surnames. Shi Miyuan personally handed the certificate of appointment, official diploma, to Abaddon. Abaddon then went to Huaidong. His current appearance was a 2-meter-tall burly man covered in armor. He wasn't much different from an ordinary human, especially when he was wearing a helmet. No one could tell the difference in his appearance. In this state, he could unleash 60% to 70% of Abaddon's strength. Only when he was fighting with all his strength would Abaddon transform into the appearance of the Death Knight Lord. His eyes flickered with soul fire, and he was 3 meters tall. If his true form was exposed, he would definitely be seen as inhuman. Therefore, when there were other Song Ting allies on the battlefield, Abaddon couldn't transform into his true form and fight with all his strength. Bai Xiaowen ordered Sig to deliver the unconscious Shindishio to the headquarters of the Chansun sect, Black Sky Peak, and let the skeleton workers guard him. Although it was called guarding, it was actually providing food and water on time to prevent Shindishio from starving to death. Even if there was no one guarding him, Shindishio wouldn't be able to walk out of the maze of Black Sky Peak. Due to his moral bottom line, Bai Xiaowen didn't kill Shindishio or turn him into a member of the blood race. This was because Shindishio was a famous Confucian scholar. Although he was a bit old-fashioned, he had a strong character and wasn't greedy. Bai Xiaowen didn't want to kill such a person if he had a choice. In the current Great Song Imperial Court, there were very few such people. Including Shi Miyuan's other political enemies, they all had a lot of dark history and weren't clean. They attacked Shi Miyuan as an evil minister just to fight for power. In essence, they were the same kind of people as Shi Miyuan. Bai Xiaowen didn't hold back against such people. He ordered Vladimir to take action. Within 3 days, he turned 2 of them into blood race slaves to monitor Shi Miyuan. End of chapter. Chapter 1663. The 2 imperial court officials that Vladimir used the night embrace ceremony to transform were both old men in their 50s and 60s. To them, there was something more important than power, and that was health. After being turned into blood race members, they felt that their bodies had regained the vitality that they had not had in a long time. Of course, these 2 officials did not know that the desire of blood race members in that area would slowly decrease, like Keats, and they were still immersed in the excitement of returning to their youth. When Bai Xiaowen stepped out and asked these 2 officials to work with Shi Miyuan for the benefit of Chansun sect, the 2 of them put on airs and wanted to reject him. Vladimir directly used his mind to cause the vampire blood in their bodies to boil. The pain was like being exposed to ultraviolet rays, and the 2 of them felt what hell was like on earth. Only then did the 2 of them realize that they had become slaves, and their lives were in the hands of others. They instantly became deflated balls, and they could only agree to become outer members of Chansun's sect and serve them. Bai Xiaowen also understood the situation at the same time. These officials had the latest intel from the front lines. The Mongol army and Song army had already broken through Kai province. The Mongols stole most of the gold and silver treasures of the Jin country royal family. The Song army snatched back the remains of the last emperor of the Jin country, Wanyan Shoshu, Jin Aizong. Along with the captured Jin country prime minister Zhang Tiangang, they sent him back to Linen to pay respects to their ancestors. This could be considered as taking revenge for the North Song being wiped out and the 2 emperors being captured. South Song gained a lot from this battle, reclaiming Shou, Si, Su, and Hao. One could say that the entire Huai River was basically recovered. Wiping out the Jin country, the entire South Song was immersed in joy and excitement. Such joy and excitement also filled Song Lizong's heart, and he had thoughts of sending troops north to reclaim the Yellow River region of North Song. After wiping out the Jin country, Mongol and South Song shared a border. Their territories were separated. The east border was at Suzhou and Zhengzhou, which was today's Shandong and Henan. The west border was in today's Qinghai. As the weather was getting hotter and hotter, the Mongols retreated north of the Yellow River due to a lack of grain. In the imperial court, a bunch of young and rash officials suggested to send troops north while the Mongols retreated north and the mid-plains were empty. Their slogan was pacify the Central Plains, defend the Yellow River, occupy Tongguan, recover the three capitals. The three capitals referred to the three original capitals of the Northern Song dynasty, Kaifeng of Dongjing, Kaifeng of Hunan, Luoyang of Shijing, Luoyang of Hunan, and Yingtian of Nanjing, Shanqiu of Hunan, all in Hunan. However, most of the senior officials were against sending troops. The reason was simple. The current Central Plains had been massacred by the Mongols, and it had become a wasteland. There were only broken and empty cities. Cities that originally had a population of hundreds of thousands were now left with only a few hundred households. Skeletons in the wilderness, corpses in the river, and epidemics in the epidemic. In order to restore the prosperity of the past, it was unknown how much blood would be needed from the Jianghuai region. Not only were the old faction officials against it, but even the generals outside knew how strong the Mongols were and were against sending troops. The debate did not last long. This was because Emperor Lizong of Song had issued an imperial edict to support the mobilization of troops to recover the three capitals, especially the imperial mausoleum of the Northern Song dynasty, which was located in Hunan Prefecture, Luoyang. After recovering the three capitals, they could imitate the Jin people and defend Tongguan, which was enough to defend against the Mongols. Once the emperor had made up his mind, even the prime minister could not object. If Shi Miyuan wanted to object, even the prime minister would have to give up his position to someone else. Bai Xiaowen did not object. At the moment, his control over the Song dynasty was not deep enough, and he needed time to slowly spread his influence to the various departments and divisions. Furthermore, the Song army and the Mongols fighting was what Bai Xiaowen wanted. If Song Lizong was different from history and became more cautious and defended Huainan, the Mongols might not start the war for a few months. Bai Xiaowen did not have so much time to waste here. Hence, the Southern Song army sent troops up north for the second time. Bai Xiaowen immediately received a notification that he had triggered a huge historical event, the Song-Mongol War. Hero Side Quest, Quelling Huaidong activated. Quest Objective, wipe out the loyal army in Huai'an. Quest Difficulty, D+. Quest Duration, none, equivalent to the time you spend in Shaoyang Plain. Quest Reward, 150 Spirit Crystals. Huaidong, where Abadan was, welcomed its first war. It was not with the Mongols but with the loyal army. The so-called loyal army was actually a local armed group that revolted because they were unhappy with the rule of the Jin. At the start, they were called the Red Coat Army. However, when Song Ningzong attacked the Jin, he recruited the various loyal army. The Red Coat Army generals, Li Quan, Yang Miaozhen, and the like, joined Great Song to attack the Jin. They were called the Loyal Army. What was worth mentioning was that Li Quan and Yang Miaozhen were husband and wife, and they were both good at using spears. Li Quan was known as Iron Spear Li. He was really strong, and his wife was even better. She was known as the Pear Blossom Spear Technique, invincible in the world. The Pear Blossom Spear Technique that she created was passed down to the future, and Qi Jiguang, He Liangchen, and other Ming Dynasty strategists praised it. The Loyal Army was a good name, but unfortunately, it changed in the end. As time went on, Li Quan and his wife had forgotten their original intentions and became greedy. On the surface, they submitted to South Song to obtain their money and grain. However, in the dark, they relied on the Mongols. Not only did they trade with the Mongols, but they also burned down the South Song imperial treasury. In the end, Li Quan even openly attacked Yanqing and robbed the treasury. He also threatened the South Song imperial court to remove Zhao Shanxiang, Huaidong General Yuku, and the like. This had touched the bottom line of the South Song imperial court, and it finally caused the South Song to attack the Loyal Army. Of course, the psychological changes of Li Quan and Yang Miaozhen had something to do with the South Song imperial court not using the right people. The imperial court official, Su Guo, who was sent to calm down the loyal army, was short-sighted and arrogant. He kept on deducting the grain of the loyal army, and his aides were also rude to the generals under Li Quan. However, no matter what happened in the past, Li Quan was now a dog of the Mongols. If they wanted to send troops to Huaidong, they had to wipe him out. The reason Bai Xiaowen triggered this quest was obviously because Abaddon was in Huaidong. The rules of the spirit realm determined that Abaddon was Bai Xiaowen's summoned creature. Since Abaddon was in Huaidong, it meant that Bai Xiaowen's combat strength was in Huaidong. Thus, he triggered this quest. The reason why this quest had a hero side quest difficulty was definitely because of the existence of large-scale war scenes, which increased the quality of the quest. However, in terms of determining the strength of the enemy, the rules of the spirit realm determined that Bai Xiaowen's camp had a great advantage, and it only gave him a difficulty of D+. In other words, even without Bai Xiaowen's participation, they would still win this war. Chapter 1664. Huaidong Battlefield. The leader of the North Army, Li Quan, asked his wife, Yang Miaozhen, to guard Chuzhou, present-day Huaiyan, Jiangsu, while he led 30,000 soldiers to attack Taizhou. Li Quan's goal was clear. He wanted to take Tongzhou, Yangzhou, and force his way into Linen. Lu Gu, the governor of Huaidong, ordered the South Army to hold their ground. The two sides were in a standoff. Late at night, the camp of the North Army's general, Li Fu, was brightly lit. Suddenly, the crackling sound of flames could be heard. Thick smoke rose into the air. "It's on fire! Come and put out the fire!" The soldiers of the North Army shouted in panic. The fire started very quickly. By the time the soldiers of the North Army discovered it, it had already spread into a huge fire. Li Fu did not have time to put on his armor. He hurriedly got on his horse and ordered the soldiers to put out the fire. However, how could they put it out in such a short time? The soldiers in the camp shouted and the horses neighed. Suddenly, a 3-meter-tall knight riding a skeletal warhorse appeared. Behind him were 9 2-meter-tall knights riding skeletal warhorses. The Bone Race's heavenly king had revealed his true form, Abaddon. He pointed his huge spear forward. The soul fire in Abaddon's eyes flickered. Spiritual energy waves turned into a voice. Charge! The black stream of iron gathered into an arrow and charged into the North Army's camp. Abaddon, who was riding on the skeletal warhorse, was like an indestructible tank. With one strike, he shattered the gate of the North Army's camp. He charged in and stabbed everyone he saw with his spear. He emitted a deadly aura that infected the soldiers of the North Army, causing their movements to become slower. Although there were only 10 knights in total, their momentum was greater than that of thousands of soldiers and horses. Enemy attack! Mixed with the cries to put out the fire, the alarm of an enemy attack also sounded. The camp was in chaos. Li Fu faced Abaddon. Although he had the strength of a commander, it was still not enough to deal with Abaddon. One spear strike was enough to numb Li Fu's body. Li Fu hurriedly jumped off his warhorse and threw away his spear. He pulled out his Yuanyang twin blades and rolled forward. His battle experience was also very rich. He knew that he couldn't fight against the monster in front of him with brute force. He could only use his advantage and agility to close the distance so that his opponent's 3-meter-long lance would not be able to exert its advantage. However, Abaddon did not care about Li Fu. He continued to charge forward on his horse, killing the Northern Army soldiers and spreading the necrosis disease to the living. Li Fu was puzzled. He was the commander of this camp, so why was he being ignored? Before he could regain his senses, he heard the sound of wings flapping. The pale wings stirred up an ominous air current as Sigdelifa's figure appeared. Her spiritual spear was as fast as lightning as she thrust it forward. Li Fu hurriedly brandished his dual blades to block the attack. The dual blades slashed out a snow-white blade screen that was like a rolling wheel. However, Sigdelfa's spear seemed to defy the laws of physics. It accurately pierced through the airtight saber curtain, broke through Li Fu's protective upstanding chi, and pierced into his throat. Huff! Huff huff! Li Fu's throat deflated, and his eyes suddenly widened. Sigdelfa pulled back the spiritual spear. Li Fu's body slowly fell to the ground. A gray mist rose as if it was pulled by an invisible suction force. It floated to the top of Sigdelfa's head and turned into a constantly spinning gray ball of mist. The resentment isn't strong enough. I can't create a chief-level soul warrior. Sigdelfa muttered, however, I can create 2 elite-level ones. The race leader skill, Darkness Absorption, was activated. The gray mist instantly split into 2 and landed in front of Sigdelfa. The 2 balls of gray mist wriggled as if they were alive. In the end, they turned into 2 slightly illusory gray shadow and gradually solidified. The 2 elite-level ghosts were the predecessors of the Shadow Assassins. Continue forward. Master needs more warriors. Sigdelfa flapped her wings. Her goal was very simple. She specifically chose elite-level Northern Army leaders to attack. The battle lasted for only 15 minutes. This camp of thousands of people had been razed to the ground. Not a single person was able to escape, because Butcher Paji and Vampire Lord Vladimir walked out of the battlefield, one from the east and one from the west. There are 76 people blocking the intersection on my side, Vladimir said with a smile. Paji killed 100 of them. At least 100, Butcher said. Vladimir bowed politely. His Excellency Paji is indeed powerful. In fact, the 2 of them were lying in ambush on each side. Who killed more and who killed less depended on luck in the direction the enemy chose to escape. Also, Butcher's counting ability was very suspicious. When he said 100, he actually meant a lot. It meant that he couldn't count them. Sigdelfa quietly flew out. Dozens of black shadows had appeared behind her. About 10 elite-level ghosts and the rest were normal-level wraiths. Every soul warrior was dragging the corpse of an elite-level or above enemy. Let's begin, Abaddon said concisely. Paji, it's your turn. Butcher Paji grunted and used his stitching skill. His deformed arm nimbly threaded the needle. However, his efficiency was worrying. After working for a long time and using so many elite-level corpses, he only created 4 stitched monsters. He was so tired that he sat on the ground, and the earth shook. Abaddon shook his head and said, I hope these stitched monsters are worth the cost. As he spoke, Abaddon stabbed his lance into the ground. Spirit energy surged wildly, and a black mist enveloped the camp. Gangrene. A skeleton soldier crawled out of the corpses of all the enemies infected with gangrene. Of course, they were the lowest level skeleton soldiers. They didn't even have a normal level template. The skeleton soldiers revived by the gangrene skill would automatically have their template lowered by 1 level. At the same time, hundreds of skeleton soldiers crawled out. Vladimir praised, every time I see His Excellency Abaddon's ability, it makes me envious. Abaddon's aura became much weaker. His spirit energy dropped to less than 500 points in an instant. The soul fire in his eye sockets dimmed slightly. With a long neigh, the skeletal warhorse under Abaddon turned into a black mist and disappeared. This was because Abaddon couldn't maintain the skeletal warhorse's spirit energy consumption and automatically chose to reduce it. As expected, the gangrene skill has a limit. Sigdelfa said, reviving more than 600 skeleton soldiers without a template tired you to this extent. It seems your limit is no more than 1,000. Abaddon nodded. He first turned 2 meters tall and had a human-like appearance. Then, he took out 2 spirit crystals and held them in his hand. He slowly absorbed them and recovered his spirit energy. Master's orders are for us to accumulate strength before the final battle. This is the first Northland camp we've captured. I've also found the locations of the other 2 camps. When His Excellency Abaddon's spirit energy recovers, we'll continue to attack the next target. Chapter 1665. 3 days later, in the Huaidong Song Army Camp. In the commander's tent of Huaidong Commissioner Lu Gu. I've ordered time and time again, deep trenches, high ramparts, and strong defenses. You are not allowed to go out to battle to wear down the enemy's morale. Abaddon stood between the two squads of officers. Although he had hidden his true form and appeared in his 2-meter-tall humanoid form, he still stood out among the South Song officers. Standing beside him was Sig Delafa. She was also in her humanoid form, about 1.9 meters tall, and the wings on her back were retracted. In the Huaidong army, she was Abaddon's adjutant. It was obvious that Lu Gu was truly enraged by this meeting. He pointed at Abaddon and said, "Commissioner Gu, tell me, what have you been doing these few days?" Abaddon's voice was stiff as he replied, "Raiding the camp and killing the enemy." "Humph. You actually didn't hide it at all." "What did I say?" "You are not allowed to go out to battle. Why did you send out troops so rashly?" Lu Gu shouted. Abaddon remained silent. Lu Gu said, "If you send out troops rashly and get captured, losing yourself is a small matter, but the morale of our army will be greatly affected. If you don't respect my orders, you should be beheaded. Someone come. Detain the ancient dragon and behead him." Abaddon tilted his head, and his bones gave off a slight cracking sound. The generals in the tent all lowered their heads and remained unmoved. Normally, they would try to dissuade Lu Gu. Then, Lu Gu would get a way out and naturally change the beheading to the military rod to show the army's might. This was all a trap. However, Lu Gu did not expect that Abaddon, as a commissioner who came out of nowhere, was not familiar with the other generals. Not only did they not have any friendship, but they also ostracized him because of his identity. Hence, no one tried to dissuade him from beheading him. They were all watching the show. Sig Delafa stood out and said, "Wait a minute, Commissioner Gu at least won the battle. He destroyed 3 bandit camps and killed thousands of enemies. It's fine if you don't reward him for such a contribution, but you want to behead him? Won't you be disappointed?" Lu Gu stared and said, "You said he killed thousands of enemies? Where is his head?" Sig Delafa, "The northern soldiers that were killed were all turned into undead creatures. How could there be any heads?" He couldn't possibly let Lu Gu and the other generals look at those skeletons. However, Sig Delafa reacted quickly and said, "There were many heads of the bandits, so we didn't bring them back. However, there was the head of Li Fu, one of Li Quan's generals, as proof. Do you want to take a look?" Soon, Vladimir brought Li Fu's head into the military tent. After checking, the military officer nodded and confirmed Li Fu's identity. Lu Gu snorted, "You went against orders to fight. Even if you made some minor contributions, you won't be rewarded. His merits offset his demerits, and the ancient dragon's death was temporarily spared. If you violate my orders again, you will be executed without mercy." Abaddon didn't say anything. Sig Delafa lowered his eyes and thanked him. As for Vladimir, he was already sizing up Lu Gu's neck to see where it was convenient to bite. The camp of the Loyal and Brave camp was at a remote estuary far away from the Central Army. It was covered by a tall fence. There were more than 2,000 skeleton soldiers hidden inside. They didn't have spiritual power, but they were at level 14. Their basic attributes were not much different from a level 14 ordinary template. In addition, there were more than 10 elite stitched monsters, more than 60 ghosts, wraith warriors, and so on. These were the troops that the 4 heavenly kings had accumulated over the past few days. These undead slaves weren't like the 4 heavenly kings, who had the ability to hide their true forms and transform into human forms. If other Song soldiers saw them, they would definitely be treated as demons and ghosts. Therefore, they had been living deep in the camp. Fortunately, the undead slaves didn't need military rations. Otherwise, with so many soldiers in the Loyal and Brave camp, they wouldn't be able to hide. Not only that, but the money and rations that Song Ting had given to the Loyal and Brave camp had also been saved. This was also the reason why Lu Gu didn't like Abaddon. The Loyal and Brave camp was his subordinate, but the money and rations were independent and didn't go through his hands. If this could be tolerated, what else could it be? In a simple wooden house. There was a straw mat on the ground, and a middle-aged general was lying on it. His eyes were closed, and he was in a deep sleep. This person was the Huaidong Emperor, Lu Gu. Lu Gu, who was in a deep sleep, had pale skin, and there were 2 bloody teeth marks on his neck. "I don't agree with your way of doing things." Delifa Sig stared at Vladimir and said coldly, "Master has instructed that without his permission, you are not allowed to use the Night Embrace skill. We don't know much about Lu Gu. We don't even know if he will yield." Vladimir looked a little weak, but he still smiled and said, "The ruler is still in Linen Prefecture, controlling the imperial court. In Huaidong, we have the right to make decisions on the spot. How can we ask for the ruler's permission? The sooner we turn Lu Gu into one of us, the smoother the ruler's plan will be. You clearly fancy Lu Gu's strength, which is why you want to turn him into a blood race slave," Sig said angrily. Sigurd Delifer said angrily, "How heavy is the price of forcefully embracing a commander-rank general? Don't you know?" Vladimir spread out his hands and said, 3 days of weakness, a 10% reduction in the upper limit of health. Although there is a price, it is not so high that it is unacceptable. Moreover, the price of this weakness is borne by me. It has nothing to do with Miss Sig Delifa, right? Sob sob. Lu Gu, who was lying on the straw mat, slowly woke up. He saw Vladimir at a glance and said angrily, "It's you. You suddenly ambushed me. Are you trying to rebel?" Seeing that Lu Gu had woken up, Sig Delifa stopped talking. Although she didn't agree with Vladimir's way of doing things, if the other party could take down Lu Gu, it would undoubtedly be beneficial to the Chanson sect's plan. Therefore, she wouldn't obstruct him. Vladimir smiled and said, "Lu Gu, first of all, congratulations on obtaining eternal life and becoming a member of the Chanson sect. What bull Shastra is tea?" Lu Gu was a general and later held the position of the emperor. He could be considered to be well-versed in both civil and military matters. At this moment, he cursed, "You are Gulong's subordinate? Call him over. I want to ask him how he leads his troops. He doesn't know the difference between superior and inferior. Interesting. Let Lord Lu Gu understand the difference between superior and inferior." Vladimir snapped his fingers. Immediately, the veins on Lu Gu's face bulged. He screamed loudly and fell to the ground. He kept twitching and sweating profusely. Blood boiling. As the lord of the blood race, Vladimir could control the blood of the targets he embraced at night and make them feel so much pain that they wished they were dead. 10 seconds later, Vladimir removed the blood-boiling state in Lu Gu's body and said with a smile, "Do you understand now? Your life and death are already in my hands. You are my servant. But don't worry, as long as you are obedient, I won't do anything to you. You can still enjoy the fun of eternal life." End of this chapter. Chapter 1666. However, Lu Gu's reaction was unexpectedly intense. He shouted angrily, "Evil demon, how dare you kidnap the commander of an army? What kind of poison did you use? Hurry up and give me the antidote. Otherwise, not only you, but even Gulong will be implicated." Vladimir was stunned. Lu Gu's race had changed from humanoid and human to undead and vampire. This was a change in race. It was completely different from poisoning. How could there be an antidote? However, Lu Gu quickly realized the changes that had happened to his body. For example, his body temperature was extremely low, his skin was pale, and so on. When Lu Gu saw the pitch-black nails on his fingertips and felt his mutated canine teeth, he was finally convinced that he was not poisoned. Instead, he had been transformed into a monster. He was no longer a human. It looks like you've finally figured out the situation. We can talk about what's next. Vladimir sighed. Lu Gu's eyes widened. Monster. You and I are irreconcilable. He suddenly jumped up and pulled out the sword at his waist. The sword was wrapped in black gas and slashed at Vladimir. However, before this slash could hit Vladimir, Lugu's body suddenly stopped. Black dirty blood seeped out from his eyes, ears, and mouth at the same time. Then, the black fog on the surface of Lugu's body surged. As if he had been exposed to the sun, his pale skin turned red and festered. Soon, he fell to the ground and died. "You killed him." Sigdelpha was shocked and annoyed. She grabbed Vladimir's collar and said, "You killed him." Vladimir's face was also filled with indescribable shock. He slowly shook his head and said, "No, that wasn't my intention. As my blood slave, he devoured his master." The vampire blood in his body flowed backwards and died. Sigdelpha suddenly pushed Vladimir, and he staggered back 2 steps. Sigdelpha said coldly, "Whether it was your intention or not, you are the direct cause of Lugu's death. Soon, the Song army will track down Lugu's whereabouts. Sooner or later, they will find us. Vladimir, your rash action has caused a serious crisis in Master's plan. It is very likely that it will turn into a major setback. You, wait for Master to punish you." A look of defeat and fear flashed across Vladimir's face. However, this matter was indeed his responsibility. There was nothing he could say to defend himself. He could only lower his head and say, I was too arrogant. I am willing to accept any punishment from the ruler. Anyway, let's report this matter to Master first." Seeing that Vladimir's attitude of admitting his mistake was acceptable, Sigdelpha didn't continue to pursue the matter. After all, they were all colleagues. Usually, they didn't get along well, but when such a big thing happened, Sigdelpha didn't gloat. That night, Bai Xiaowen, who had received this secret report through the 1,000-mile sound transmitting talisman, rushed to the battlefield in Huaidong. After the 4 heavenly kings came to visit, Sigdelpha recounted the whole story without any embellishment. Vladimir lowered his head and didn't say anything. Bai Xiaowen shot him a sharp look. "You disobeyed my orders." Vladimir knelt down and said, "Your subordinate is guilty. Please punish me, Lord Ruler. Your subordinate will have no complaints." Bai Xiaowen snorted. "Vladimir, do you think your position is as stable as Mount Tai?" "I wouldn't dare." "I think you're very daring." Bai Xiaowen said calmly, "Firstly, I invested a clearing fruit in you and helped you gain wisdom. The cost was very high. Secondly, I have too few members of the blood race under my command, and Kitz's template is too poor. Only you, as the leader, can become the leader of the race. Thirdly, you have already developed many blood race slaves, including 2 high-ranking officials in the imperial court. If I touch you, those 2 high-ranking officials will die immediately. So, you have nothing to fear, right?" As a vampire, Vladimir's body was drenched in cold sweat. He knelt down on the ground. "Your subordinate definitely didn't think so. Regardless of whether you think so or not, I can responsibly warn you." Bai Xiaowen's tone was slightly cold. "Kitz's template is poor, but he has a good foundation. He can be promoted to the leader rank at any time. It's not like you don't have a successor. As for gaining wisdom through the clearing fruit, Kitz doesn't need it. So what if those 2 high-ranking officials suddenly die? As long as I control Shimeyuan, the imperial core of the Southern Song dynasty still won't be out of my control." Vladimir knelt down and said, "Great ruler, your subordinate just wants to take the initiative to show off your subordinate's ability. I want to gain more attention in your heart. That's all." Bai Xiaowen obviously knew that Vladimir was telling the truth. He was just eager to gain merit. As for keeping slaves for his own sake, he more or less had this thought. But which of the other 3 heavenly kings didn't? Well, maybe the butcher didn't. Bai Xiaowen gave Vladimir a warning. Finally, he emphasized, as a heavenly king of the blood race, being obedient is the most important. If you disobey my orders for the sake of showing off, then no matter how great the losses are, I can only take back your power. Yes, your subordinate will remember Lord Ruler's teachings." Vladimir was still kneeling on the ground, maintaining his sitting under the earth posture. Stand up and speak. Bai Xiaowen said slowly, since this is your first offense, I won't pursue it further. In the future, no matter who it is, if any of you cross the red line of disobeying orders, I won't tolerate it. Yes. The 4 heavenly kings agreed at the same time. Bai Xiaowen took one last look at Lu Gu's corpse. He sighed slightly and said, Vladimir, do you know why Lu Gu was different from those court officials? He was unwilling to become a servant of the blood race? Vladimir shook his head. Bai Xiaowen said, those court officials were all on the verge of death. You gave them a second chance at life. In comparison, taking orders from you isn't something unacceptable. Moreover, I've observed and understood those people beforehand. I know that they aren't upright officials. However, Lu Gu is different. He's in his prime and is the commander of an army. How can he be easily manipulated by you? Vladimir nodded and accepted the advice. Delafa Sig said, Master, this Lu Gu isn't a good person either. We've clearly made contributions, but he wants to kill us. The Southern Army is clearly stronger than the Northern Army, but under the leadership of this useless commander, they've been stubbornly defending and don't dare to fight. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, when marching and fighting, the biggest taboo is the lack of orders. Lu Gu naturally wasn't happy that you disobeyed orders to fight, but he didn't punish you because you've made contributions. Threatening you with a few words is already considered light. In addition, stubbornly defending and not fighting is beneficial to the Southern Song dynasty because the Song court has already cut off the supply of money and food to Li Quan's army. Li Quan's army won't be able to last for a few months before running out of food. When that time comes, their spirit will be worn down, and they will naturally be able to defeat them. Chapter 1667. In fact, Lu Gu could be considered a capable commander. In history, he was the one who defeated Li Quan's northern army. However, his stubborn policy was not in line with Bai Xiaowen's interests. Even if Vladimir didn't do anything to him, Bai Xiaowen would still think of a way to transfer him away from Huaidong. However, his methods would be much gentler. Delafa Sig said, Master, Lu Gu's sudden death. How should we deal with it? Bai Xiaowen said, after I received the news in Linen Prefecture, I immediately ordered Shimi Yuan to make 2 preparations. In less than 3 days, the new Huaidong Resettlement Commissioner, Zhao Fan, will arrive. I also received the transfer document and commander's seal for the Huaidong army. After pausing for a moment, Bai Xiaowen continued, Lu Gu's sudden death is actually an opportunity. The enemy's spies will definitely hear about this. If we release the news that we are withdrawing the army and waiting for orders, the enemy will definitely come to seize Tongzhou. At that time, we can wait for them to be exhausted and attack them when they are unprepared. It will be enough to kill the enemy leader and succeed in one fell swoop. Bai Xiaowen explained the details of this plan in detail to the 4 heavenly kings, especially the Delafa of Abaddon and Sig. In the future, Bai Xiaowen would not be able to do everything by himself when conquering and managing multiple planes of existence. Therefore, he needed to cultivate the 4 heavenly kings' ability to be war decision-makers as soon as possible. In the past few days, the 4 heavenly kings' actions of accumulating strength had made Bai Xiaowen quite satisfied, except for Vladimir's rash actions. This was because the 4 heavenly kings had just gained the wisdom of humans and were not very experienced in handling matters. After some training, they would definitely be able to stand on their own. Except for the butcher. The next day, the news of the sudden death of the Southern Army's Huaidong Resettlement Commissioner, Lu Gu, was passed on to Li Quan by the spies of the Northern Army. After Li Quan found out the truth, he was very excited. His food supplies used to rely on the imperial court of the Southern Song dynasty. Now that they had turned against each other, he had no other source. He could only rely on plundering after capturing cities. His previous savings could only last for a few months. Of course, he had to end the battle quickly. With Lu Gu's sudden death, the Southern Army was leaderless. It was a great opportunity for Li Quan to attack. Otherwise, if this dragged on, the Southern Song dynasty, a new commander, the battle would be difficult to fight. That night, Li Quan personally led an army to attack Tongzhou City. On Bai Xiaowen's side, he promoted Abaddon to the position of commander-in-chief of the Huaidong army through the document and the commander's seal. He temporarily replaced Lu Gu and set up a trap in Tongzhou City. Li Quanjun did not expend much effort to break into Tongzhou City. However, Li Quan himself had doubts and did not enter the city himself. Instead, he sent his generals Yan Tong and Xingde to enter the city first. In the end, the Song Nation soldiers lying in ambush on both sides of the city cut off their path. Then, they closed the city gates and split Li Quan's army in half. Li Quan urged the middle army to break the gate as soon as possible, but Butcher brought the plague beast and a group of stitched monsters to release poison gas in front of the city gate, forming an insurmountable natural moat. It should be mentioned that the Butcher, the giant plague beast, and the other undead creatures were said by Abaddon to be demonic ghost puppets summoned by the Taoist masters and used to assist in battle. Even the bone race soldiers that the four heavenly kings had accumulated over the past few days were said to be Taoists' method of turning beings into soldiers. As for the Taoist masters, they were naturally Taoist Lu Wang, who was dressed in white robes and exuded an immortal aura. This method of deception was taught by Bai Xiaowen. He always believed that these few thousand bone race soldiers had been hiding and would be exposed sooner or later. The best plan was to take the initiative to come up with an excuse to let the spirit world's natives and allies accept and understand the existence of the skeleton soldiers. It was precisely because of this that the Song Nation soldiers did not panic. Instead, their morale was greatly boosted by the help of the Taoist masters. They blocked the vanguard troops of Yan Tong and Xingde in the city. Li Quan knew that he had fallen into a trap. He also saw a few fierce generals charging left and right in the battle formation. They were unstoppable. He knew that he was no match for them and hurriedly ordered the army to retreat. These valiant generals were, of course, Sigdelifa, Vladimir, and Sheiji. Even without revealing their true appearances as the Valkyrie and the Vampire Overlord, Delifa Sig and Vladimir could bring out 60 to 70% of their strength in their human forms. This was already sufficient for such an intense battle. When Li Quan retreated to the north and prepared to return to the camp, he discovered that the Song Nation had already occupied the camp. The fences, antlers, ditches, and other defensive facilities became obstacles for Li Quan's army. With the ferocious pursuers behind him, Li Quan was forced to abandon the camp and flee east. This escape route was also within Bai Xiaowen's calculations. Bai Xiaowen executed his Taoist techniques at the critical juncture in advance and created a large swamp area. This caused Li Quan's army to sink into the swamp, making it difficult for them to advance or retreat. Li Quan and his subordinates possessed energies such as stellar energy and could temporarily float in the air. They were not afraid of the swamp. However, the soldiers under Li Quan's command did not even possess an ordinary constitution. They did not have spiritual energy and could not fly. They could only sink into the swamp. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank. The Song Nation army gave chase and rained down arrows. Li Quan's soldiers became live targets. Helpless, Li Quan and the others could only abandon the army and flee. Li Quan's 10-odd men were all disheveled as they fled in panic. "Commander, we are already 10 kilometers away from the battlefield. We should be safe," Li Quan's general, Goen Yong, said while panting. Li Quan sighed and said, 30,000 soldiers died in one day. Even if I manage to escape with my life, what is the point? Goen Yong quickly said, "Commander, don't be depressed. This battle is not Commander's fault." That's right. The Song Nation army in this battle is too strange. They have many fiendish demon puppets helping them. There are also a few experts with unfathomable strength. Another general, Zhang Lin, consoled Li Quan. When we return to Chuzhou City and see Auntie, it will not be too late to reorganize the army and fight again. Auntie was how the Red Cloak Army's former subordinates addressed Yang Miaozhen. Li Quan panted and said, "We can only do that." The group advanced another few hundred meters. Suddenly, Li Quan frowned. He narrowed his eyes and gestured for the others to stop. A white-clad youth sat on a branch of a large tree at the side of the road. This youth's clothes fluttered, and he looked very handsome. An invisible light seemed to surround him, making others forget about him. "Commander, why are we stopping? I wonder which clan this youth before us is from." "Commander, don't complicate things. Our journey is more important." Li Quan's subordinates tried to persuade him. However, Li Quan showed a grave expression. As he looked at the white-clad youth before him, he vaguely felt that this youth's bearing was extraordinary. He was not an ordinary young master. "You are Li Quan." Naturally, the white-clad youth was Bai Xiaowen. When Li Quan used insight, he asked. Li Quan said cautiously, "That's right. Young man, who are you? Why are you here? You even know my name." Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "I am here to kill you." Chapter 1668. As soon as he said that, Li Quan's subordinates started to scold him. As Li Quan looked at Bai Xiaowen's calm face, the uneasiness in his heart grew even stronger. He took a step forward and said sincerely, "I don't know where you came from, but I don't know if you were influenced by Song Ting. I betrayed the Song dynasty for a reason. Song Ting didn't know how to judge people and bullied my army. He killed my son and my old subordinates. If that wasn't the case, why would I join the Mongols?" Li Quan's reaction was very fast. He thought of Bai Xiaowen as a hero who wanted to get rid of traitors for the country. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, "Li Quan, you don't have to say anymore. I know that there is a reason for this. Of course, Song Ting is at fault. You can be a useless king and disobey Song Ting's orders. But you joined the Mongols and wanted to destroy the Song dynasty. Don't you see the bones on both sides of the Yellow River? For the sake of the people, you have to die." Guo Anyong and Zhang Lin shouted at the same time, "General, why are you talking so much to this kid? If he dares to block our way, just kill him." Li Quan didn't want to be lucky anymore. He touched the iron spear in his hand and said slowly, "Since you want my life, then let's see if you have the ability." Bai Xiaowen waved his hand. A giant wolf appeared. It was the Wrath Claw that had just become a lord. "Go, a rare lord, 2 lords, and a group of rare elites. Just nice for you to practice. Oh, practice your claws." Bai Xiaowen touched the Wrath Claw's giant head. It felt good. The Wrath Claw was so big that its head could reach Bai Xiaowen. After hearing Bai Xiaowen's order, Rage Claw didn't slack off. With a roar, a gust of wind rose from the ground as it pounced forward. Li Quan held the iron spear with both hands and was ready to fight the Wrath Claw head-on. As for the elite officers under his command, they surrounded Rage Claw's abdomen and chrysanthemum. This tactic was similar to the one the 4 heavenly kings used to attack the king of the mountain. Unfortunately, Li Quan and his subordinates didn't have the strength of the 4 heavenly kings. The Wrath Claw was huge but very agile. It jumped sideways and dodged Li Quan and pounced on Guo Anyong. It waved its claws in black cracks. Laceration. Due to its large size and the fact that it had wind attribute demon power, the Rage Claw's laceration skill had already become a close combat AoE skill similar to Cleave. While dealing additional damage to the main target, it could also deal sweeping damage to all the enemies in front of it. Blood spurted out from Goen's body. His protective aura was as weak as paper in the face of Rage Claw's rare Lord-class demonic power and brute force. In just one exchange, the commander was heavily injured. This was because the armor had reduced some of the physical damage, so he didn't die on the spot. The few elite officers beside him were torn into pieces by the residual power of the laceration wound. Bai Xiaowen thought to himself that at the Evolver stage, the gap between Laceration Lords and Laceration Lords seemed to be even greater. The Wrath Claw bit down as fast as lightning. Another general, Zhang Lin, was picked up by the Wrath Claw and thrown to the ground. There were several deep teeth holes in his body. Blood flowed. He died on the spot. Seeing the Wrathclaw's power, Li Kuan's elite generals didn't dare to fight anymore. They turned and ran in 2s and 3s. A black shadow appeared. Kit's blocked their path of retreat and raised its claws. Kit's had been stimulated quite a bit recently. It became more active in battle and didn't like to slack off. Its strength was very close to a laceration lord's. These elite generals couldn't break through its blockade. Some tried to escape from Bai Xiaowen's side, but they were turned to charcoal by Bai Xiaowen's thunder palm. When Li Kuan saw Kit's appear, he felt a chill in his heart. You're the Taoist expert who summoned the demonic ghost puppets to help the Song army? Li Kuan said hoarsely. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. You could say that. No wonder, Li Kuan sighed. If it weren't for you, our army wouldn't have been defeated so badly. I'll kill you and avenge my brothers. Li Kuan suddenly jumped into the air. He tried to go around the Wrathclaw and pounce on Bai Xiaowen. Rustle, 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 the Wrathclaw's huge tail spun like a windmill. A hurricane suddenly formed, causing Li Kuan's speed to decrease. Then, the Wrathclaw raised its claws and swatted Li Kuan down as if it were swatting a fly. The battle ended very quickly. Li Kuan leaned on his iron spear and looked at the casualties. He gasped for breath and said, "Someone will avenge me." Bai Xiaowen said calmly, "You're talking about Yang Miaozhen, right? She's occupying Chuzhou City, and she's also an obstacle to our army going north. However, I already have a way to deal with her." As he spoke, Bai Xiaowen flicked a bewitching talisman into Goen Yusher's forehead. Goen Yusher, who was heavily injured, screamed and fell to the ground. Then, he stood up again. However, his movements were stiff and mechanical. He walked to the tree where Bai Xiaowen was and knelt down silently. Li Kuan's eyes were filled with fear. You can, controlling people's thoughts. Such a strange and powerful ability. Li Kuan's heart was filled with deep worry for his wife, Yang Miaozhen. However, he had no strength left. As his blood flowed, his body temperature quickly left him. In the 11th month of the 5th year of Xiaoding, the Huaidong army of the southern Song dynasty defeated Li Kuan. There were still 2 days until the new commander of the Huaidong army, Zhao Fan, arrived. Bai Xiaowen knew that speed was the most important thing in war. After killing Li Kuan, he immediately ordered the Song army to go north and attack Chuzhou City. Li Kuan led Goen Yusher and a batch of defeated soldiers to open the Chuzhou City gates. The temporary commander, Goen Yusher, was the first to charge into the city. The Song army behind him fought to be first. Yang Miaozhen, who had the strength of a lord, mounted her horse and fought with Abaddon in the middle of the courtyard. This female general's strength was indeed valiant. Her pear blossom spear appeared and disappeared mysteriously, suppressing Abaddon. Of course, Abaddon's level was 2 levels lower than the level 16 Lord Yang Miaozhen. On the other hand, his identity was very important. He could not reveal his 3-meter-tall Death Knight Lord form in front of others. He could only use 60% to 70% of his strength. Luckily, Sig Delifa was there to help. The two of them were able to suppress Yang Miaozhen. The remaining soldiers in Chuzhou City were far from the Song army's match. Li Kuan's south expedition had taken most of the troops from the Zhongyi army, leaving behind only the old and the weak. Furthermore, the city gates were opened, and a street battle broke out. The defenders were unable to use their advantage. Very quickly, the remaining troops of the Zhongyi army in Chuzhou City surrendered. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, Yang Miaozhen stopped struggling. She rejected the Song army's advice and killed herself. Chapter 1669. After the Song army's flag was planted in Chuzhou City, Bai Xiaowen also received a notification from the spirit realm. D+ Heroic Side Mission, Pacify Huaidong, completed. Mission completion, 92%. Evaluation, excellent. You have received 77 spirit crystals. The spirit crystals were only secondary. Bai Xiaowen closed his eyes and looked inside himself. he had also received a heroic 3D plus light ball. This was the most important thing. Bai Xiaowen summoned Abaddon. After this battle, the three Heavenly Kings' troops had all improved. Butcher had added more than 20 elite stitched monsters, Sigdelifa had created dozens of elite ghosts and hundreds of ordinary wraiths, and Abaddon had added 1,000 bone race soldiers. If it weren't for the limitation of spirit chi, Abaddon could have created more bone race soldiers and carried out Bai Xiaowen's skeleton sea tactic. Bai Xiaowen said, "Next, I will control the imperial court and reward you according to your contributions." Abaddon should be promoted to commander-in-chief and remove the word deputy. The new Huaidong commissioner, Zhao Fan, is an official under Shimi Yuan. He shouldn't make things difficult for you. The Chanson sect controlled the imperial court, so they could enjoy a lot of benefits. It was obviously a serious crime of killing a superior, but it was covered up by the higher-ups. They only gave the result of Lu Gu's sudden death due to illness, and replaced him with an obedient commander. This did not affect Abaddon's promotion. Sigdelifa asked, "Master, what should we do next? Should we go up north and fight with the Mongols?" Bai Xiaowen shook his head. "Huaidong is just a side army. The Song army's main route is not here, but Luzhou. If we set off from Luzhou, we can directly attack Bian City. Wait for a while. When you receive the transfer order, come and discuss it with me." Leaving the four Heavenly Kings to settle the troops, Bai Xiaowen became a boss and cultivated in peace. Bai Xiaowen didn't cultivate the Taishu Sutra for the time being. In the short term, it was better to invest in the light balls of Taishu's Art of War. This was because the Art of War determined Bai Xiaowen's level. Bai Xiaowen's level was too crucial. The levels of the four Heavenly Kings and the thousands of undead servants under them were all linked to Bai Xiaowen's level. When Bai Xiaowen leveled up, it meant that all the summoned creatures and undead servants leveled up. In addition, as a Lord Tier class book, the Art of War was much easier to break through than the Great Void Sutra. However, there is a saying that goes, "Flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but unintentional willows grow." Bai Xiaowen had indeed learned a lot from Tai Gong's The Art of War, but he was still a little short of a breakthrough. However, as Bai Xiaowen cultivated, his understanding of the Great Void Scripture was like the overflowing Yellow River. Once he started, he could not stop. With just a little bit of cultivation, he directly advanced the Great Void Scripture to the third level. Notification from the spiritual realms rules, due to the breakthrough of the Great Void Scripture, your body has been tempered. All your attributes have increased by 14 points. The upper limit of your true inner force has increased by 300 points. Your special talent, spiritual power mastery, has increased to level 1. Your ability to control true inner force has increased. In the quiet room of Chuzhou City, Bai Xiaowen opened his eyes and ended his cultivation. A slight cracking sound came from the bones in his body. Waves of unprecedented strength surged out. His meridians had widened, and the ball of true inner force in his energy center had expanded a little. Bai Xiaowen's 4 attributes had all exceeded 100 points. Agility and vitality were 115 points. The lowest strength was 108 points. The highest mental strength was 134 points. Most importantly, the upper limit of his spiritual power had increased to 2,960 points. It was close to 3,000 points. Bai Xiaowen's fingertips spat out a sliver of true inner force. This sliver of true inner force seemed to have a mind of its own. It revolved around Bai Xiaowen's fingertips, curling up and uncurling according to Bai Xiaowen's will. Is this the spiritual power mastery? I seem to understand what this ability is. Perhaps, my most important specialization now is this spiritual power mastery. Bai Xiaowen flipped open the second volume of the Taiping scripture and randomly chose a level 1 Dao spell that he had never learned before. It was called the Clear Dust spell. After reading the main points of the Clear Dust spell once, Bai Xiaowen directly used his true inner force to cast it. His white robe flashed by a ray of light, and it was as good as new. Special specialization, spiritual power mastery. Increases the ability to control true inner force to the smallest detail, as well as keen perception. With the ability to control true inner force to the smallest detail, whether it was casting spells or learning spells, it was like pushing a boat with the current, getting twice the result with half the effort. Furthermore, with his keen perception of spiritual energy, he could easily find the weak points in his opponent's spells. Then, he could use his strong control of spiritual energy to target the weak points and break the opponent's spells as he wished. No wonder the first few levels of the Great Void Scripture did not teach Tao spells. As long as one mastered the spiritual power mastery, no matter what kind of Tao spell the opponent cast, one would be able to break it at will. What was the point of learning Tao spells? It was just like the 9 swords of Dugu in Jin Yang's The Smiling, Proud Wanderer. After mastering it, one could break any move in the world. Of course, to reach the level of being able to break the opponent's spells at will, the current proficiency level 1 was definitely not enough. Currently, Bai Xiaowen could only directly sense the weak points of level 1 Dao spells, 1-star skills, without the help of the Eye of Evolution and break them at will. For example, Bai Xiaowen did not need to learn the Clear Dust spell. He could cast it after reading it once, and of course, he could break it. However, if it was a level 2 Dao spell, he could not learn it after reading it once. Of course, level 2 Dao spells were not too difficult. If Bai Xiaowen could not learn it after reading it once, he could learn it after reading it a few times. The spiritual power mastery increased the learning speed of all skills. The Great Void Scripture is indeed a king-level professional manual. Bai Xiaowen's consciousness sank into his sea of consciousness and flipped through the Great Void Scripture again. He could now cultivate the 4th level of the Great Void Scripture and did not encounter the so-called bottleneck of the middle level. This was because the Great Void Scripture was a manual that Bai Xiaowen had memorized when he was an awakened. He had already engraved all 9 levels of the scripture in his heart. It was different from professional manuals like The Art of War that were bestowed by the rules of the spirit realm. It was, of course, a good thing that there was no bottleneck. However, Bai Xiaowen still focused most of his energy on the cultivation of the art of war. It was the same for the next 10 days or so. In the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaowen had been in the Shao Dingding Plain for more than a month. Originally, the rules of the spirit realm required a stay fee. However, because Bai Xiaowen had already built a resonance teleportation array, the White Phoenix territory was connected to the Shao Dingding Plain. It did not matter how long Bai Xiaowen wanted to stay in the Shao Dingding Plain. However, as the situation developed, Bai Xiaowen had no choice but to end his cultivation. "Master, this is bad." Sig Delifa knocked on the door and entered. Chapter 1670. What happened? Bai Xiaowen sat cross-legged on the bed and looked at Sig's Delifa, who hurried in. "Master, Lin Enshirmiyuan used a 1,000-mile voice transmission talisman to send an emergency report. The Song Dynasty army is facing a huge crisis." As Bai Xiaowen listened to Sig's description of the Delifa, his face slowly turned solemn. As the Mongols did not have enough grain, they retreated across the Yellow River. In the central plains that were occupied by the Jin country, the various cities were basically guarded by surrendered Jin country generals. They only had hatred toward the Mongols and had no loyalty. The Mongols only had a few thousand troops south of the Yellow River. Under such a situation, the South Song army carried the hatred of their country and the high morale of reclaiming their land. Bai Xiaowen also felt that the South Song army would obtain an early victory. At the very least, reclaiming the 3 capitals would not be a problem. The real problem was how to defend against the Mongol army's attack next spring. The moment the Song army started to advance, they were really unstoppable. The moment the surrendered Jin country generals saw the Song flag, they opened the city gates. In just a few days, Quan Zizai's forces set out from Luzhou and even conquered Shouzhou, Meng City, Buzhou, Taikang, etc., reclaiming Bian City. The Mongols' response was to send small groups of elite cavalry to disturb the Song army's grain path. When Quan Zizai led his troops to Bian City, he realized that the North Song capital was already in ruins. There were only a few hundred families in the city and less than 1,000 defending. Such a city was not enough to resupply. The difference between the Mongol and South Song soldiers was also evident. Just a small group of Mongol troops was able to cause serious damage to the Song army's grain path. Often, a small group of 10 Mongols would dare to attack a group of a few hundred. After killing the Song soldiers, they would burn the grain and leave. When he heard that, Bai Xiaowen felt a little emotional. Who said that the ancient people did not know how to use troops? The Mongols' tactic was pretty much a replica of guerrilla warfare. Quan Zitsai's forces in Bian City did not have enough grain. The imperial court was still rushing Quan Zitsai to continue west to reclaim Luoyang. Quan Zitsai could only let the soldiers split 5 days' worth of grain into 2 groups and head west to Luoyang to resupply. The Mongols allowed the Song army's first team to enter Luoyang and gathered their forces to ambush the second team. The Mongol cavalry launched a sneak attack, and the archers at the back of the Song army did not even have time to form up to face the enemy. Their formation was broken, and they all fled. They were destined to be unable to escape from the elite Mongols on horseback, hence the number of casualties was extremely high. Following which, the Mongol army directly attacked the remnants of Quan Zikai in Luoyang. Quan Zitsai had successfully entered Luoyang, but he realized in despair that the situation in Luoyang wasn't much better than Bian City. It was similarly littered with bones, and only a few hundred commoners were still struggling at death's door. After a few days of stalemate with the Mongols, Quan Zikai's forces could only eat wild grass to fill their stomachs. With no other choice, Quan Zi chose to break out of the encirclement and flee to the south. The Song nation's army abandoned all the military equipment and carriages they brought. Now, the Mongol army was chasing after them. The Mongol army was skilled in cavalry and archery, and the quality of their soldiers were strong. If they chased after a group of infantrymen who lacked food, the outcome was obvious. One could say that the Song Tang's strategy of guarding the pass and river had failed. A few thousand Mongol troops had defeated the 60,000 Song troops heading north. Bai Xiaowen's eyes suddenly opened. Who is the Mongol general defending the mid-plains? Sig Delifa said, I heard that he is called Taker. This person has a lot of strategy and is not simple. Bai Xiaowen concluded. Even if the Mongol army was stronger than the Song army, to use a few thousand to defeat 60,000 was already an amazing strategy. Master, what should we do now? Zhao Fan ordered the army to give up on the plan to head north and defend Chuzhou. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and smiled. Zhao Fan was scared out of his wits by the Mongols. No matter how strong the Mongols are, they only have a few thousand south of the Yellow River. Can they fly to the east and attack Huaidong? For Taker to be able to crush 60,000 Song troops is already a miracle. Based on the strategy he has shown, it is impossible for him to be greedy and act rashly by attacking the southern Song dynasty with a few thousand men. Bai Xiaowen got up and said, I'll go find Zhao Fan and ask him to send out orders to allow Abadan's forces to help Quan Zikai. Due to Shi Miyuan's prior greeting, Zhao Fan was rather respectful towards Bai Xiaowen, a Taoist expert. He also knew that it was with the help of this Taoist that the leaderless Huaidong army was able to defeat Li Quan so quickly. Furthermore, Abadan's loyal and brave battalion was an independent army. The money and food were given directly by the imperial court. Zhao Fan was too lazy to care whether the loyal and brave battalion was in danger or not. He easily wrote the order and allowed Abadan to send out troops. Abadan led 3,000 skeleton soldiers to head north. With Bai Xiaowen's help, Abadan took the shortest route and met up with Quan Zikai's forces in Kaizhou 2 days later. At this point, Quan Zikai's army was only left with around 10,000 men. They had lost 5/6 of their forces and were all starving. Luckily, the skeleton soldiers under Abadan did not need to eat or drink. The dry rations they brought with them could be given to Quan Zikai's army. The 10,000 Song soldiers under Quan Zitsai's command could be said to be grateful to the ancient dragon capital. This was definitely a life-saving grace. Without the Gulong capital command, less than 10% of them would be able to escape back to the Song territory. After Bai Xiaowen ordered the Sigdelifa to investigate the enemy, he grasped the movement and route of the Mongol army. "We have to use this chance to kill Taichar." Bai Xiaowen made a detailed plan. Bai Xiaowen let the front of the Mongol army pass. The 2,000 elite cavalry were surrounded by 3,000 skeleton soldiers and 10,000 Song soldiers at Kaiyazhuang outside of Kaizhou City. This battle was really intense. The low-level Mongol soldiers all had normal strength. They seemed to know a type of energy known as blood energy. Blood energy had a huge buff to physical attacks, including but not limited to close combat, shooting, and the like. The small leaders of the Mongol army were all elites. At the level of Centurion, they were pretty much all rare elites. There were even a few commander-level ones. Further up, the Mongol Kiliarchs were true leader-level generals. As the main commander, Tachar was a rare leader. In such a 10,000-man battle, it was definitely not enough to rely on a few lords. Although lords were strong and could kill 10, 100, or even hundreds of people, there would be a time when their spiritual energy was used up. As they say, many ants could bite an elephant to death. As long as the enemy soldiers were not afraid of death and continued to charge, they would be able to kill the lords. Of course, lords could leave whenever they wanted to. They could directly fly out. With their high priority status, no one could stop them. This was where lords were strong. Unless the enemy had lords to hold them back, then it was a different story. Chapter 1671. The 3,000 skeleton soldiers did not care about the number of casualties and blocked the path of the Mongol cavalry. This was the first time Bai Xiaowen used the soul essence of the death god's appearance to strengthen all his undead servants. Each skeleton soldier had a layer of black energy wrapped around their bodies. After being strengthened, each of their attacks carried an energy similar to spiritual energy. Regardless of whether it was their attack power or defense power, it was greatly increased. In other words, these weak skeleton soldiers became normal monsters with spiritual energy after being strengthened by the death god's appearance. Although they were at a disadvantage in a one-on-one fight against the valiant Mongolian elites, the 10,000 Song nation soldiers behind them were not to be trifled with, either. The Song army archers who received supplies shot out arrow rain, causing the Mongol elite soldiers to fall off their horses. Furthermore, there were the 4 kings and many elite and leader undead monsters helping them. The battle lasted for just over an hour before it ended. The 2,000 Mongol elite cavalry were all wiped out. The Mongol general Tachar was killed on the spot. The 4 kings stayed behind to clean up the battlefield while Bai Xiaowen pulled Quan Zitsai and the Song army under him into Kaizhou City to rest. After all, the scene of the 4 kings cleaning up the battlefield was a little uncomfortable, so it was best not to let the Song army see it. Kaizhou City was where Wanyan Shoshu of the Golden Grief sect escaped to when the Jin country was destroyed. Half a month had passed, but one could still see the ashes of war and the corpses that filled up the river. Such cities could be found everywhere in the Central Plains. The Mongols' slaughter policy was simply too inhumane. "Lieutenant Gu, I have no words to thank you for saving my life. Please accept a bow from me." Abaddon's aura was a little weak. It was obvious that cleaning up the battlefield had used up a lot of spiritual energy. His muscular body stepped forward and helped Quan Zitsai up. "It's a small matter, no need to thank me." Quan Zitsai sighed. Jinghu Governor Shi Songji gave excuses and refused to send reinforcements. "If not for Lieutenant Gu, who knows where my 10,000 men and I would be buried." After lamenting for a while, the two of them sat down. Abaddon, on the other hand, placed Bai Xiaowen at the head of the table. When Quan Zitsai saw this, he was secretly amazed. However, he respected Bai Xiaowen and knew that this young Taoist master was a genius of the age. Therefore, he was willing to sit under Bai Xiaowen. "General Gu, since you have brought supplies and wiped out the Mongol army in Hunan, can you consider going up north to recover the 3 capitals?" Quan Zitsai said, "The Mongolian army has been destroyed, and Taichar is dead. No one can stop our army anymore. I, Quan Mao, am willing to support you and help you accomplish this great feat. Abaddon looked at Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly. Abaddon also shook his head. No. Why? Quan Zitsai didn't ask Abaddon this time, but Bai Xiaowen. He could already see that this sect Master Lu could actually make decisions for Abaddon. Now is not the time to recover the 3 capitals. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. What we destroyed today was only a small portion of the Mongol army in Hunan. The main force of the Mongol army, after the war against the Jin, retreated to the north of the Yellow River to rest. If we continue to go north, of course we can recover the 3 capitals. However, when the Mongol army comes down south next spring, how are we going to stop them? Quan Zitsai said, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. The imperial court proposed the strategy of guarding the pass and protecting the river, so we can only listen to orders. Bai Xiaowen said calmly, General Quan, you've seen the situation of the Central Plains. Do you really think that the strategy of guarding the pass and protecting the river is feasible? Quan Zitsai was stumped. Bai Xiaowen continued, I followed the army to help, and the cities I saw along the way have all been abandoned. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the cities, but now there are only a few hundred families left. Bones litter the plains, corpses filled the river. I think that the 3 capitals are also in ruins. In such a wasteland, there is no way to defend it. Just the transportation of food is a big problem. Quan Zitsai said, but we are still following the emperor's orders. Bai Xiaowen said coldly, the emperor is wrong, and as a general, we can't help him make a mistake. Haven't you learned your lesson? Quan Zitsai thought about how only 10,000 of the 60,000 soldiers were left, and he lowered his head sadly. He didn't even care that Bai Xiaowen said that the emperor was wrong. Of course, the Song dynasty was ruled by the emperor and the officials, and it was far from the Qing dynasty, where they didn't dare to say anything bad about the emperor. Bai Xiaowen said, the current emperor is hot-blooded and doesn't think before doing things. If we recover the 3 capitals, he will definitely send the soldiers of Jianghuai to the north to defend these empty cities. He will send gold, food, and people to Jianghuai to recover this wasteland. If it was peacetime, this would be good governance. 20 years of education would be enough to restore the prosperity of the north. The problem is, will the Mongol army give him this chance? Quan Zitsai muttered, no, the Mongols will have an excuse to attack us. Quan Zitsai was not a mediocre person, and he knew that Bai Xiaowen was telling the truth. At that time, before the Central Plains became prosperous, Jianghuai, the foundation of the southern Song dynasty, would become empty, and it would be easy for people to revolt. Bai Xiaowen continued to criticize, talking about guarding the pass and the river is complete nonsense. The Jin kingdom relied on the natural barrier of the Yellow River to resist the Mongols for 20 years because of the 100,000 Jin cavalry. The Yellow River is long, and the Song dynasty lacks enough cavalry to defend it. According to my estimate, we need at least 200,000 elites to defend the natural barrier of the Yellow River. Does the Song dynasty have such a force? Quan Zitsai shook his head. Bai Xiaowen stood up and said, let's go. General Quan, return to Guangzhou. The Song dynasty's northern expedition is over. The Mongols' southern expedition is just about to begin. In December, the remnants of the Song dynasty army returned to the Song territory. Song Lizong admitted defeat, and he dealt with a portion of the pro-war officials, including Quan Zitsai. They were all demoted, and some were even removed from their positions. Following which, Song Lizong issued an edict to calm the discussions in the imperial court. After doing all this, Song Lizong's morale had obviously declined. Based on Shi Miyuan's report, Song Lizong no longer cared about government affairs. Shi Miyuan, Jing Qingji, and the other officials controlled the imperial court. It was easier to be an official with someone in the court, and it was the same for being a general. Abaddon's mistakes would be covered up, but his contributions would not be covered up. Sending troops to save Quan Zitsai and wiping out the Mongols' Cha forces was all on Abaddon's head. Very quickly, Abaddon's promotion order was given out, and he was promoted to the Huaibei appeasing ambassador. The imperial court increased the amount of money and grain, allowing Abaddon to expand the army and take charge of the defense of the Huaibei region. Bai Xiaowen's goal had been achieved. Abaddon had finally become an important general of the Southern Song dynasty. With Shimi Yuan and the other demons controlling the imperial court, the Chanson sect had completely infiltrated the Southern Song military and political system. The initial plan was complete. Chapter 1672. It's about time to go back. At night, Bai Xiaowen looked up at the starry sky in the Shao Ding dimension and thought to himself. Calculating the time, Bai Xiaowen had been in the evolutionary plane for almost a year. 1 year was the time when the Earth was about to pass by the White Phoenix territory. Now that he had some free time, Bai Xiaowen could go back to Earth for a few days of vacation and see how Xiaojun and the super gods were doing. The war in the Shao Ding dimension had begun. Even if Abaddon and Vladimir couldn't destroy the Mongols, they could still maintain half of the Southern Song dynasty. Moreover, they also had the help of Delifa and Paji the Butcher. In real history, the Southern Song dynasty lasted for a few decades before being destroyed. It lasted for so long because of the internal strife in the Mongols. Ajadai, Monk, and Kublai ascended the throne one after another, giving the Southern Song dynasty time to breathe. However, the situation in the Shao Ding dimension was different. Genghis Khan, Temujin, should have died 4 or 5 years ago, but he was still alive now. With Temujin's Iron Fist rule, the Mongols wouldn't have internal strife and would rarely fight among themselves. They would definitely erupt with even more power. Bai Xiaowen calculated in his heart. Suddenly, he received a notification from the Blue Star Overlord group. Warning, warning! Mengchuan, Tianfu has issued a declaration of war against your territory. Bai Xiaowen was shocked. When the overlords were in the spiritual plane, they couldn't receive messages from the Blue Star Overlord group. Now that they suddenly received a message, it was obviously a special situation. The rules of the spiritual plane specially sent a warning to the side that was being declared war. After the initial shock, Bai Xiaowen quickly calmed down. A declaration of war didn't mean that the war would start immediately. After a declaration of war was issued in the Overlord group, it would take 10 natural days before the target territory could be attacked. This was the agreement between the Blue Star Overlords. This time was enough for Bai Xiaowen to arrange the affairs in the Shao Ding dimension and return leisurely. The Tianfu territory must have found an excuse for war. What excuse is it? Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. He thought of the group of people who escaped from the Tang territory. Of course, there was another possibility, and that was the death of Yuan Lin from the Heavenly Province. However, the one who killed Yuan Lin was the descendant of God, Atli Lan Thor. Bai Xiaowen was only present at the scene and had even used a transformation technique to conceal his appearance. The possibility of him being caught was very small. No matter what, we have to go back and deal with it. It's not a bad thing for the Heavenly Province territory to make trouble now. My undead army is growing stronger every day, and the Mongol invasion is still at least 2 months away. I can transfer the forces of the 4 heavenly kings to deal with the invasion of the Heavenly Province. Bai Xiaowen sighed. It was impossible to say that he didn't feel any pressure. After all, the Tianfu territory was not something the Great Tang territory could compare to. As a veteran territory, there was no need to doubt its strength. However, the White Phoenix territory was no longer the White Phoenix territory of the past. Especially after the newly promoted 4 heavenly kings, their strength had skyrocketed. If you break away with 1 punch, you will avoid 100 punches. Compromise could not bring about respect and peace. Only battle could make the enemy fearful. Bai Xiaowen made some arrangements and asked the other 3 heavenly kings to stay in Chuzhou City. He himself took Sig for Delifa and headed to the Shangqing School. Shangqing School, Huxin Island. Chenrong's delicate face was both angry and happy. You still know to come? Bai Xiaowen said, I was busy with worldly affairs. I only came back from Kaizhou a few days ago. Qinrong said softly, I know. Your subordinates in Huaidong defeated the rebel army, Li Quan, and annihilated thousands of elite Mongol cavalry. So you know. Bai Xiaowen smiled. Qinrong said matter-of-factly, you are the guest elder of the Shanqing school. Of course I have to pay attention to your actions. I don't want you to do something that will tarnish the reputation of the Shanqing school. Bai Xiaowen was speechless. If he wanted to tarnish the reputation of the Shanqing school, reviving the dead was definitely crossing the line. He didn't know if Qinrong didn't care about it or if he didn't know what Abaddon and the other heavenly kings did. Bai Xiaowen was more inclined to the latter. Qinrong must have learned about the situation of the Song army through the earthly forces of the Qin family in Jiangnan. The 4 heavenly kings reviving the dead and expanding the army of the dead was a secret. Even the higher-ups of the Song army didn't know about it. Of course, even if Qinrong knew about it, Bai Xiaowen didn't think it was a big deal. With Qinrong's way of doing things, he could understand and accept Bai Xiaowen's actions. They were essentially the same kind of people, but their abilities were different. You came here to get the 1,000-mile voice-transmitting talisman, right? Qinrong rolled his eyes at Bai Xiaowen. Otherwise, you wouldn't remember the sect. How can this be? Bai Xiaowen shook his head. I'm here to say goodbye. Qinrong paused and asked, what's wrong? Bai Xiaowen sighed. My territory is going to be engulfed in the flames of war again. An even stronger enemy has declared war on me. I have to accept the challenge within 10 days. Then what about the war between the Song court and the Mongols? The Mongols want to conquer the south. They have to wait until spring when the flowers bloom and the grass is plentiful. It will take at least 2 to 3 months. Bai Xiaowen said slowly, within 2 months, there will be a conclusion to the war between the territories. Bai Xiaowen didn't say who would win or lose. Qinrong sensed this and said, you don't seem to have much confidence. This isn't like you. Is the enemy very strong? Bai Xiaowen said, he's much stronger than our previous opponent. Qinrong knew that he was talking about the Tang territory where the giant barbarian army and the underworld demon army belonged. He nodded and said, don't worry. You are a guest elder of the Shanqing school. If you lose and lose your territory, you can come to the Shanqing school to seek refuge. Bai Xiaowen joked, I thought you were going to say that you would fight alongside me. Qinrong bit his lip and lowered his head. I'm sorry. Bai Xiaowen quickly said, I'm just joking. I understand. The Shanqing school was passed down to you by your master and grandfather. It's normal that you can't risk the school. You've done enough for me. Qinrong quietly took out a stack of talismans and handed them to Bai Xiaowen. These are the 1,000 miles voice-transmitting talismans that I made in a month. There's also the flying crane messenger. Take them. Thank you. You've helped a lot. Bai Xiaowen smiled. As for the contribution to the school, Bai Xiaowen planned to give it to the Shanqing school with the money provided by the imperial court of the Southern Song dynasty. These worldly resources would be helpful to the development of the Shanqing school. Qinrong took out a jade slip and handed it to Bai Xiaowen. This is the method of incorporating the spiritual mark into the basic sword talisman that I've researched. I've named it Sword Seal. Sword Seal is still a level 1 Dao technique. According to your request, I've tried my best to simplify the rune circuits required by Sword Seal to reduce the energy consumption. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.